I'll have reached the goal I'm dreaming of. Me, I don't want to set the world. I just want to start a flame in your heart.
I love down in your heart. Baby.
777, and you are listening to The Fringe FM.
You're listening to Lighting the Void Radio. From Studio 401, it's the Stranger Than Fiction News right here on The Fringe FM. I'm Vance Nesbitt, and here's our headlines. Thrift store warns buyers of haunted furniture. Reports of continuous nightmares from previous owners. A North Carolina thrift store has earned $1,000 off a hand-carved bedroom suite that may have just been haunted. News outlets report Habitat for Humanity in Rowan County's Restore warned would-be customers that the previous owner reported that he and his wife had continuous nightmares while the furniture was in their bedroom. Their dogs were also suspicious of the 1950s highboy chest of drawers and a canopy bed that they would not stop barking at. News source, Fox News. And scientists at Harvard University uncovers DNA switch that controls genes for the whole body regeneration. All this meaning that humans may one day have the ability to regrow limbs. This coming after those scientists have discovered that on-off switch for the DNA whole body regeneration. Some animals can achieve extraordinary feats of repair, such as salamanders, which can grow back their legs, or geckos, which can shed their tails to escape a predator and then form a new one in just 2 months. Source, Yahoo News. And hundreds had flocked to frozen Lake Michigan to see an underwater 11-foot marble crucifix with Jesus on it that is visible for the first time in 4 years because of the extreme cold. An estimated 1,200 sightseers saw the giant crucifix statue of Christ at the bottom of Little Traverse Bay on Lake Michigan for the first time since 2015. Severe weather prevented anyone from seeing the statue for the last 4 years. Workers did cut a hole in the lake's icy surface to revelers so that they could look onto the water and see the statue. The 11-foot marble crucifix weighs about 1,800 pounds and features a 5.5-foot tall statue of Christ. It was made in Italy in 1956 after being commissioned by a family mourning the loss of their 15-year-old son. It is regarded as a shrine honoring people who have died on the water. Source, Daily Mail Online. And the return of unidentified ring of lights in the sky over Minnesota. In a previously shared story on Stranger Than Fiction News, residents from Shakopee Archery Range in Jackson Township in Stillwater in the state of Minnesota saw a strange ring of lights resembling a flying saucer. The mysterious ring of lights have appeared again, this time back in September of last year. The flying saucer-like object had been photographed by a couple who were driving home from downtown Minneapolis when they exited the highway in Bloomington. They saw the smallish band of lights in the sky. This story was reported at BendedReality.com. And wrapping up the Stranger Than Fiction news with our fun fact. Men are 6 times more likely to be struck by lightning than women. Thanks for listening to the Stranger Than Fiction news right here on the Fringe FM. Again, I'm Vance Nesbitt, news anchor and sorcerer.
Message is being broadcast by the Department of Defense of the Republic. At 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, multiple unidentified objects were confirmed to have entered Earth's atmosphere.
Discovery Houston, 20 seconds to LOS T-Drift.
The first message that comes to you is you are a divine being. You matter. You count. You come from realms of unimaginable power and light, and you will return to those realms.
The vast stretches of the unknown and the unanswered and the unfinished still far outstrip our collective comprehension.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Broadcasting from Forest Tower Studios, all the way from the Deep South. Now, here is your host, Joe Root.
Hello, my lovely late night folks. I'm Joe Rupin. This is Lighting the Void. It is Thursday night, March the 21st, on into the 22nd, and the moon has already begun its wane. It's still bright here in the midnight hour. A beautiful night here in the natural state, bathed in lots of moonlight, just how I like it. And we are live on KTOK Digital Broadcasting, The Fringe FM. That's thefringe.fm. Our website is lightingthevoid.com. If you want to call into the show at any point in time, that call-in number is 1-800-588-0335. Give us a like, follow, and all that stuff on social media. Please, just go to Lighting the Void on everything. Follow, like, leave a review, support us, donate, use the Amazon portal, buy a t-shirt, all that. Well, you know, if you're just listening now, you don't really have a reason to, but afterwards you may want to. And then don't forget about our events. I put a new events page up at lightingthevoid.com. We are going to try to take trips, 2 of them, as a matter of fact, one to the Yucatan and one to Egypt. Big goals, I know. Those are big goals, but I think we can get it done. So if you go to lightingthevoid.com/events, you will see everything you need to know all about those trips. Also, coming this Monday, make sure you go to getthet.com, sign up for the webinar. Ronnie will be doing this bi-weekly webinar, so you can get your coupon code. I will be there as well. I don't really get to talk until the question and answer part of the broadcast, but I will be there. And if you sign up, you'll be able to get that as well. Tonight, we're going to be speaking with the one and only Micah Hanks from the Gralien Report and Middle Theory. Also, one of the best hosts in the world, in my opinion, on KGRA. But I think it's the second or third time on this show. I think it's his second. But we're going to get into some deep discussion. Probably more about alien life in altered states, but there's no telling where this is going to go, actually. Yeah, grab the Surfer Music app, too. I know a bunch of you have downloaded it, and you know now why, right? So the people that have done it, they know why. Now they're like, oh, man, I thought you was just trying to sell this thing and blah, blah, blah. But it's so awesome. Yeah, it is awesome. Make sure you grab that app. You don't even have to put your information in when you get it. It's just that easy. So, yeah, tonight I wanted to kind of start the conversation with that because it's been all the rage here lately. If you've been paying attention to this stuff, okay. Now, I know in this clutter of information and ufology and this whole paranormal world, there's all kinds of places that you can go, that you can swim through to get your content, to get your information. And then you start figuring out who you're going to trust, right? If you haven't listened to the Gralien Report, you are doing yourself a huge disservice in this community. I'm not just saying that, right? So you'll see what I mean. If you've never listened to it, if you've never checked it out, go to gralienreport.com, download the latest episode, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. It is 100% authentic. It's engaging. It's informative. It's one of the best paranormal and altered news shows I've ever heard in my life. And there's other people out there like that, but Micah's definitely one of them. And Micah was, when I first got into radio, I looked up to all these different people, all these different networks, like Coast to Coast, Clyde Lewis, some KGRA hosts. And I never thought for a minute any of them would give me the time of day, talk to me, or anything. Then this was, I think, like 2 years ago. And Micah was one of the first people to give me the virtual handshake, so to speak. And he's been one of the coolest guys I've ever known in this field. So there's kind of comfort. There's kind of like this comfort about the guy that's very hard to explain. But if you've listened to his show and you know the guy, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. I know his fans feel it as well. But if you don't know who Micah Hanks is, he's a writer and podcaster and a researcher whose interests cover a variety of subjects. His areas of focus include history, science, philosophy, current events, cultural studies, technology, unexplained phenomena, and the ways the future of humankind may be influenced by science and innovation in the coming decades. Now, podcasting became a hobby for Micah in early of 2011 after a 6-year stint working in radio as a producer and on-air talent. And since then, he has continued to pursue his passion for information-driven talk programming through a variety of podcasts, including the Gralien Report, which is a science and unexplained mysteries program, as well as an unfiltered current events podcast, which is cool as well. It's called Middle Theory, co-hosted with longtime friend and fellow commentator Christopher McCollum. History and archaeology are among Micah's favorite areas of study, and there's so much more I can say about this guy. Go check it out, MicahHanks.com, GralienReport.com, MiddleTheory.com, and you can also catch him on KGRA Radio. Thank you so much for coming on the program, Mike. It's good to have you back.
Well, good to be here. Moderately caffeinated at this hour, but I do have coffee on hand. I think that's requisite for a conversation of the caliber that we're about to have. How you doing, man?
I'm good. I actually, after I had Heather Lynn on, she was like, you know what you need to do? You need to go listen to this song by John Denver called Late Night Radio. I had no idea John Denver did a song called Late Night Radio where he sang about UFOs and stuff. So after I listened to that, I've been in the best mood ever.
Now, when would that song have been written, though?
I don't know if it was before or after he started beating his wife. I don't remember.
Well, I just wondered if that came before the era of the great and unfortunately the late Art Bell, because a lot of people think that late night radio of this kind started with Art Bell. But, it goes back a little further. You may remember Long John Neville, who going back to the 1950s and certainly the 60s, was doing programs where he had guys like Ivan T. Sanderson coming on the show. Yeah, I didn't know anything about the guy, but like Heather told me about him too. And she was like, you need to go listen. So that night after I got off the air, that's what I did. I listened to Long John Neville and I listened to some John Denver. Both were really refreshing, by the way. Yeah, that's right. Well, there's sort of a cryptozoological note with the John Denver songs. Country Roads, I listen to that song and it's peaceful and reminds you of, home. But for me, I'm also thinking about those windy mountain roads up here in Appalachia and some of the weird stories that we would tell each other as teenagers riding around on those backcountry roads, just trying to scare the pee out of each other every night. And that was what my friends always loved about me. When I was able to drive, they would all jump in my pickup truck with me. And they're like, come on, let's go riding with Micah at night, because he'll tell us all these weird stories and creep everybody out in the middle of the woods someplace, and we hope we don't get a flat tire or run off the road.
Right. Yeah, you know what else I forgot to mention, though, man, was the books that you wrote. I didn't even talk about that.
Well, that's okay. We can talk about those.
My favorite one is Magic Mysticism and the Molecule. I kind of, to be honest with you, I kind of, thumbed through it at first, right? But when I really read it, I was thinking, wow, you're writing about in this book what is becoming popular just now. I mean, things like DMT and all of this other stuff and magic and mysticism have been talked about forever. But all of this conspiracy theory, they're just now putting it together. For example, did you watch like the Alex Jones podcast with Joe Rogan? You saw that, didn't you?
Well, here's the thing. I think a neighbor of mine about 4 houses down had it playing. And I mean, if that's going on anywhere within about a quarter mile of your house, you'll hear it anyway because, Alex Jones. And so you can't miss it. No, I'm kidding. I mean, yeah, I watched some of it. I didn't get to watch all 5 hours of it. Talk about a marathon. Yeah. But yeah, he's talking about, the Pentagon's, using DMT and that they're communicating with the fractal elves. And again, I think we got to break down some of the lingo there, Joe, because a lot of this stuff, the idea of DMT elves and everything, that trope of the DMT experience probably goes back to Terence McKenna. And I talk about that in Magic Mysticism and the Molecule. And very briefly, to summarize that for people who haven't read that book, this was my first book. The publication date, I think, is misleading because if you look at it on Amazon, and it says, hold on, like 2016, but that's the second edition. You know, that book originally came out, I think, in 2000, 9 or 10 maybe. And so, you know, it's an older book. It was my first one. But what I was interested in at that time was the anthropological studies, you know, that Jeremy Narby and Terence and Dennis McKenna, you know, that guys like that had done, where they had traveled to places like South America and they had observed cultural traditions that involved the use of entheogens.
Right.
And I'd read this book by Daniel Pinchbeck, and that book was called Breaking Open the Head, A Journey to the Heart of Contemporary Shamanism. And I just was fascinated with that. I mean, to me, that would have probably been like the experience people decades before had when they first read Carlos Castaneda, you know, the teachings of Don Juan and things like that. And of course, I ended up getting into that too. But for me, the whole story was not just the experiences people had when they induced hallucinogenic states, you know, altered states of consciousness with hallucinogens. To me, it was, well, what are people trying to do? What occurs when an altered state is induced? And what are the other ways one can do this? And so for me, this is interesting because, and I should mention, by the way, I've got a new podcast I'm doing these days too called the 7 Ages Audio Journal, which is primarily focused on anthropology, archaeology. That's the thing about it. I wasn't really as into anthropology. I'd taken anthropology courses in college at that time, but when I wrote Magic, Mysticism, and the Molecule, I was looking at the altered states of consciousness. What this really all leads back to is an aspect of the human experience which is a part of our evolution, which is a part of our culture, which is a part of perhaps the formation of the mind. You hear Terence McKenna talk about the stoned ape theory and things like this, the idea that the introduction of hallucinogens might have actually inspired some creative thought early on that was an instigator to the formation of maybe not just the complexity of the modern human mind, but consciousness itself as we know it. So, yeah, to me, studying the altered state from an anthropological perspective is key and fundamental, perhaps, to understanding human nature.
Yeah, but what is it? The thing about it, though, is what does it imply that when we get in these altered states of consciousness, what is it? What are we making contact with? Right? Are we making contact with ourselves? Are we just, like losing our mind, so to speak? Is it just an altered brainwave, or are we actually making contact with entities? You listen to all of these people. There are countless experiences on YouTube of people that when they go into these altered states, there's a lot of parallels. Some of them are like the machine elves. Other ones talk about crosses, or they can see people that are around them. Like they say, like I'm laying down and people are walking around me and I hear voices. And other people say that they feel like they're laying in this thing and they can see a cross, like they can see through the illusion. So it's pretty interesting, especially when you start looking into the occult and stuff, where people really dig in really hard, like John Dee and Aleister Crowley, and do all these crazy things, and they get in altered states, and the next thing you know, they're talking about aliens, right? It is kind of weird.
There's a consistency to the experience, yeah. And again, that was the central focus that I was interested in. Now, I couldn't tell you if that's really what's happening, and as you know, I'm pretty skeptical about things, but my initial approach had been whether or not this experience is truly indicative of some kind of contact. People throughout the ages who have induced altered states seem to believe or had the intention of trying to make contact. That seems to have been a common theme. I got to give a shout out to my wonderful assistant, Lauren, because before the broadcast tonight, I told her, I said, I got a late interview and I'm going to be really tired. I need some stimulating conversation. And so, she and I jumped on a call and we're kind of going over some ideas prior to the interview, just partially to keep my mind awake. But one of the things we were talking about were what you might call archetypes, but essentially the cultural motifs that are shared throughout different cultures throughout time, and again in different parts of the world where there should not have been and presumably was no direct contact. And one of the best examples of something like this that we see, of course, are the flood mythologies, and a lot of people play that down. But one of the examples we looked at, we took one of my academic translations of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and we're looking at that story of Utnapishtim, which is, of course, a corollary for what later is more widely known as the story of Noah, building the ark, the survival of the flood. And then we grabbed a copy of James Mooney's Myths of the Cherokee. And again, in the Myths of the Cherokee recorded around the turn of the last century by anthropologist James Mooney, you see this same story of a man who is told by his dog that there's going to be a rain, And the man laughs and says, well, I don't believe this at all. But the dog says, you got to believe me. And the dog brings to his attention a portion on his neck where the skin is exposed and the bone is showing through. And for whatever reason, the man takes this to be, and again, make of that symbolism, I guess. Make of it what you will. But this is indicative to the man in the story that this dog is telling the truth. And the dog says, now that you believe me, build a raft so that you and your family can survive. And so the man builds a raft, and the great flood comes, and he and his family are the only ones that survive. And so after the flood for several days, when the waters recede, they find themselves on a mountaintop. This story probably sounds very familiar. And again, he hears, what sounds like shouting and dancing and playing off in the distance. And he climbs to the top of another mountain and looks off in the distance and sees nothing but the bones laid waste of those who had lived. And he said he realized that the noise must have been the dancing ghosts. I mean, It's a very remarkable story. But the point was, and what Lauren and I were looking at, it's like, again, people can play that down. But to me, whatever that is, an archetype or just a cultural motif that is shared in different parts of the world, the fact that there's such consistency. And then that led us to grab Giorgio de Santillana and Eartha von Deschen's book, Hamlet's Mill, which, again, another speculative book, I think, written in the 1960s that looks at the idea of their general premise is that cultural mythologies throughout the world are indicative of a knowledge the ancients had of what was called precession of the equinoxes. That, in essence, is what these mythologies are trying to convey. Now, a lot of people read the book and they said, I'm not so convinced that they really drive that point home well, or that is indeed what was going on. But modern innovations in archaeoastronomy do seem to suggest that people in the ancient world, they absolutely were more aware of what was going on in the night sky than we once gave them credit for. Now, the interesting thing to me about that isn't necessarily an archaeoastronomical connection to it. So, that's interesting. But again, the prevalence of the similarity in myths from around the world, different cultures that had no contact, that's fascinating. One more, too, that I'll add, because, again, this is going to get back into the idea of magic and the ancient mind and what this may have meant. There's this story that we found in Hamlet's Mill where they recount what they call a fox star. And the legend is that in some traditions, there's a fox that chews at the sky. And if it chews long enough, what happens is that what unites the sky and the earth is broken. And then, of course, this leads to the end of the world in one way or another. One might interpret that as being the sky falls, or the ground falls away from the sky, whatever. But they attribute this to a fox, and they call it the fox star. And there's this curious prevalence of the fox as the trickster in world cultures. Another iteration of that is the fox wedding. When it rains while the sun is shining, many cultures around the world, and in some instances it may be a hyena or a wolf, maybe even a deer, but many cultures attribute this to a fox, where if it rains while the sun is shining, it's a fox wedding. This even is somewhat inferred from some of the high relief art that we see at Göbekli Tepe, where there is a fox or an animal very similar to one, and some interpret the tail as being indicative of maybe a comet. Who knows? But so I'm interested in why these sorts of cultural motifs come to mind, and it goes to show, I guess, when we study these mythologies, that obviously there's some unifying character. It doesn't necessarily mean that there was one mother culture. We all came from one, lost civilization. I don't know that that's the answer. To me, we could say that those things come from within the mind, but if that is the case, we begin to understand perhaps what the source of some of these experiences that Terence McKenna and the later, what you might call, psycho-adventurers, the psychonauts, wrote about. Why do people see elves? Why do people have these experiences? Why are there common themes that we see between some of the drug-induced hallucinogenic trips and things like alien abduction or mystic experiences? So all those things were on my mind when I wrote Magic, Mysticism, and the Molecule, and whatever it is that connects us. I do think that there is archetypally, in that Jungian sense of things, there's something going on in our minds that we haven't quite unraveled. And I like to refer to that as an archaeology of the mind. We have to dig through that strata just like we would Earth and unveil those aspects of the ancient mind.
Well, we're not, in the end of your book, you talk about high-tech shamanism, right? We are not, I want to say that we're almost doing that already. Some people say that, Bill Gates has got a place where they're doing that kind of stuff. But I think that we're scratching the surface of it. I think, there's already noetic sciences and a whole institute about that. But I think that some of these bigger tech companies are actually, and this is just my opinion, I don't have much to back it up, but are way more interested in this than what a lot of people think.
I think that's a good possibility. And again, here's the thing, with all due respect, because I try to show respect to all my fellow human beings. And frankly, I don't want to get off in a conspiracy theory discussion here per se, but I mean, I'm one who has taken serious issue with some of the things that Alex Jones has said in recent years, particularly about Sandy Hook.
Right.
Whole other story. But again, I talk about that a good bit on my other shows. However, I think the problem, too, is that a lot of people would listen to Alex and they hear him talking about DMT machine elves, interdimensional beings using altered states to contact people, and they think this is just utter silliness, whereas they actually may not realize where those, these seemingly crazy concepts come from. Now, again, Alex absolutely has this knack for just weaving together these, again, narratives that I think are largely, if not entirely,
that's what
unfounded.
He's good at, is just creating a story out of a few facts, right?
Yes, and then once it's all said and done, it's pig hybrids, human pig hybrids. Yeah. I'm getting the note from the assistant to mention the pig hybrids, but again, that is where his mind goes with this, which is so silly. But again, the idea that there may be people in government, people again with think tanks, people who are doing research into, what'd you call it? I mean, maybe the nuances of unconventional methods of communication or accessing areas of the minds or processes of the body. Again, this is men who stare at goats type stuff, and there are reasons why books have been written, have been popular subjects in the last few decades with pertinence to that kind of a thing. Because, yes, there have been military think tanks, organizations, and actually intelligence agencies that have sought to try and exploit any latent powers of the human mind as yet untapped, which may exist, that could be used for everything from espionage to, potential use in warfare, predicting the future, who knows what else. And many would even say, I think that those in the singularitarian camp, those who are the advocates of artificial intelligence and things, Ray Kurzweil and others, they would tell you, hey, look, we don't know if ESP and these kinds of things exist now, but in the next few years, with the help of technology, they certainly will. So in any way you want to look at it, whether this sort of thing, let's use ESP as an example, whether that exists or not is irrelevant. The concept alone is enough to drive us toward technology that will make it a reality. That, to me, is really important right now, because we're on the cusp of a new era for humankind, a new dawn, a brave new world, to borrow the idea from Huxley. And, it's something that's been echoed throughout the ages by many others, too. There's going to be a change. What will we be? Will we as humans be that? Will we be us beyond that point, beyond that event horizon, which is why the futurists call that a singularity? So, again, these are relevant questions that we need to deal with.
Yeah, for sure. And I love the fact that you stay relatively skeptic on a lot of this stuff, because I tend to put things together in my mind, too. I really do, right? So after I've studied the occult and esoteric, where Manly P. Hall and other people are talking about these hidden masters that we can no longer connect to, that the priestcraft used to connect to, and then you see people like Crowley, doing altered states, and then they hook up and they meet some alien called the Lamb, and then other people are meeting machine elves. It's easy to put a story together in your head and go, well, these are beings, these are star beings that seeded our planet, and we can no longer connect to them, but we're starting to again through the use of DMT. And then you could say like things like Alex Jones, like, well, I can get shot for saying stuff like this. I mean, it's just kind of like added effect. I don't think he's going to get shot for saying it, but you know what I mean.
Well, yeah, but he would like people to think maybe that is a real possibility, and therefore it puts some urgency behind the things that he says. And again, I'm not trying to give him a free pass, but I definitely think that perhaps Alex Jones is unnecessarily demonized at times.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
To me, in the modern culture, again, it's this idea of manufactured controversy. And these days, are we so bored? I mean, again, maybe it's just the perspective I glean from the study of things like archaeology. I look at how things were thousands of years ago and the live or die aspect of that. I posted an image on my Instagram earlier today of me holding a roughly 12 to 9,000 year old stone projectile point found in South Carolina by Dr. Chris Moore, who is a friend and colleague of my 7 Ages research team. And we explore, again, from the non-woo-woo side, you might say, archaeology and ancient mysteries of the past. Not ancient aliens. I mean, we're looking at, human cultures, what they did, where they lived, how they lived. But again, they did what's called blood protein analysis of this stone point that I'm holding in this image. And what they found was, instead of megafaunal bison or mastodon or deer or turkey or something like that, the blood protein analysis showed it was human blood. the remnants of which was thousands of years old, still found on that stone point. Now, that could tell us...
Well, how old? Like thousands, like 3,000, or do they know?
Well, this certain kind of point is called a Dalton point, and this would have been dated to the late Paleo-Indian period. Now, again, in certain parts of the country, the Midwest and whatnot, Daltons have been found in situ, which means that the cultural context and the temporal context in relation to time that we have would date them back to as near as 9,500 years ago. But again, in the southeastern projectile point sequence of South Carolina that was actually put together by Dr. Chris Moore, he would put the Dalton at around 12,000 years to maybe 11,000 years, that late Paleo-Indian period right after the Clovis culture, which is famous for a number of reasons. We could get into that later because they're also associated with an ancient climate mystery called the Younger Dryas, and there may be a comet impact that's involved with that. There's some new science pertaining to that as well. But again, this Dalton point that I'm holding in that picture, again, according to Dr. Moore and others, would roughly date to around 11,000 to 12,000 years ago. Now, think about that. Blood protein analysis, they can still extract blood or the evidence that there was blood on this and determine what kind it was and that it was found to be human. What does that mean? Was it used to kill somebody else? Did the guy cut himself while he was making it? We don't know. But the point I'm making is life was really hard back then. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, the way we lived was we had to fashion our weapons out of stone. It was much colder there at the end of the Pleistocene and the beginning of the early Holocene. I mean, it was cold. We were coming out of an ice age. We had to hunt to live. It was very cold, very uncomfortable. And nowadays, we have to create controversy just to keep ourselves entertained. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do see what you're saying. I see exactly. And that does imply a lot, too, as far as consciousness experiments go. Like, are we really effectively exploring consciousness like we think we are? I mean, back then, I don't know. I want to get into this. We got to take a break. But I think maybe back then, you know, they probably did it a little bit better. That's just my thing. Because there wasn't much to do besides rub sticks together, you know. But
that's right.
But yeah, we'll be right back with more with Micah Hanks coming up. Go check it out if you haven't checked it out. The GralienReport.com, MicahHanks.com. Stay with us.
Lighting the Void Radio. The truth is out there.
There's something out here.
And so are we. KTOK Digital Broadcasting, The Fringe FM.
Hey, is that a new music app?
Yeah, check it out. Surfer Music Discovery. It links to thousands of online stations, but the twist is you see the song names and artists that are now playing live.
That's different. No guessing. Looks like a waterfall of music.
So many formats. Rock, oldies, country, R&B, jazz, and a whole lot more.
How's that spelled?
Surfer. S-U-R-F-R.
Is it expensive?
It's free. No need to sign up or sign in.
Get the Surfer Music app free from Google Play or the App Store.
When I'm done running with the wolves after hunting down a half-ton bison, I look forward to a mind-teetering escapade evening on The Fringe FM.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Okay, nurse, let's get this man to the ER stat.
Right away, doctor.
We see this every day. Heart attack or angina pain due to blocked and clogged arteries. Chelation can remove obstructions or blockages from arteries and help avoid painful and expensive surgery. Now there's Angioprim. It's a liquid oral chelation product that you take with juice. You start to feel the results fast. Angioprim increases blood flow all over the body, and that means more energy and strength to take on the day with less aches and pains. 6 60 years of research has gone into chelation, and Angioprim is the result. A safe and easy way to unblock your veins and arteries from buildup that slow circulation.
Paging Dr. Jones. Please report to the emergency room right away.
Log on now for a special radio offer from Angioprim. That's angioprim.com/radio. ANGIOPRIM. Angioprim.com/radio or call 877-882-7221. That's 877-882-7221.
This is Cortana from Shift Happens, telling you to pour a glass and park your ass because you're listening to KTLK, The Fringe FM. Shifthead.
Who were the real ancient Egyptians? What is it about ancient Egypt that captivates us all? The critically acclaimed series Magical Egypt is back with all new episodes. Let Chance Gardner and company take you on another adventure through Magical Egypt in the new series Magical Egypt 2. Magical Egypt 2 attempts a forensic reconstruction of the science of the ancients through a study of ancient aesthetics. Also, the best researchers and authors in the field like John Anthony West, Graham Hancock, Laird Scranton, Robert Bouval, Lon Duquette, Aaron Cheek, and more join together to explore the topics of the esoteric and the hidden messages of the ancient Egyptians. Just go to magicalegypt.com right now and put in the code word FRINGE and get 10% off any download or order, including the groundbreaking original Magical Egypt series, as well as the new episodes in Magical Egypt 2. Also, check out the great work and the companion series at magicalegypt.com. Click the banner on the Fringe FM or go to magicalegypt.com and use the code word FRINGE and get 10% off your order today while it lasts.
Folks, this is very important information. What's to be said about CBD? AncientLifeOil.com. Our CBD is made from hemp and has 0.003 THC, which means this wonderful product won't get you high, no matter what amount you take. What does CBD do for the body? My hands are tied. But you can Google CBD benefits and be astounded. When you're finished reading, you'll want to log on to AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com and purchase. Life is good when you feel good. People are tired of pain. People are asking for non-GMO organic products to help them with, you fill in the blank. Legal in 49 states, and again, our CBD is made from hemp. Ancient Life Oil is about helping people one by one by one. If you wonder how good the product is, the CEO takes it every day without miss. AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com. Have a great day.
Howdy, this is Catalina, and you're listening to Lighting the Void with Joe Roop.
All right, welcome back to Lighting the Void. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter, guys. It's totally free. Put your name and email in there. I got 3 books I'm going to be giving away. The thing about giving you guys books on the newsletters, I have to make sure that they are copyright free. And so that takes a little bit more research than you can imagine trying to find out what the copyrights are on things. But yeah, go over to lightingthevoid.com, sign up for that. It is coming out, I promise. I know most of you have been waiting for that. But tonight we are here with Micah Hanks from the Gralien Report. And you see, I didn't even know. That's how bad this is, Mike. I didn't know you had another so you got another podcast you're doing about archaeology. Is that right?
Yep, that is correct. And it's at 7ages.org. It's called the 7 Ages Audio Journal. Unlike my other shows, which currently I'm actually doing those solo. My longtime co-host, McNonymous, on the Middle 3 podcast, he is now married, and he is now full-time employed with a fairly large company that I think I can say this much, they do security. And so he travels a lot. And so I've gone ahead and just, led the charge doing that show. He's still very much involved behind the scenes, but I host that show on my own. But the 7 Ages Audio Journal actually is co-hosted by 2 fine chaps, Jason Pentrail, an environmental scientist friend of mine, and then also a Army Corps of Engineers geologist named James Waldo. And together, the 3 of us, you might call us avocationalists. We're dedicated amateurs in the field of archaeology, but with their environmental science and geology backgrounds, they really bring a lot of science to what we try to do with our assisting the archaeological community in the Southeast, and also our independent research into history and archaeology that we do on the show.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to hear that, man, because I'm interested in. I've been a little bit more interested in archaeology as of late. To be honest with you, I kind of left it when John Anthony West passed away. It was kind of, it was hard because to me, he was like the ultimate satirist and renegade archaeologist, and I thought he was really on to something. And I just didn't see regular archaeology interesting me. But if you, that's pretty stupid, because if you actually look into it, there's some very interesting stuff in just regular Plano academic archaeology. I mean, it's a great mystery. It's one of the biggest mysteries, as a matter of fact. We just don't have the answers to to the beginnings of human life, and that's what it's all about, trying to figure out what was going on back then. It is some fascinating stuff.
Well, it is. It absolutely is. And, again, there are what we call, I guess, paradigm shifts that occur from time to time. And in archaeology, there have been a number of those. I mean, again, at one time, the leading anthropologists in North America, including Alois Hrdlicka, he was the head of the National Museum, which, of course, is known today as the Smithsonian, but not the head of the museum, but the head of anthropology there. And Hrdlicka was, again, the astute anthropologist of his day, but again, we didn't have radiocarbon dating at that time. We didn't have reliable scientific dating techniques that could give us, without question, earlier dates for the antiquity of humankind on the North American continent. And so at one time, again, it was supposed that it was unlikely that there were people here much earlier than 3,000 years ago. And that all changed with the discoveries at, Folsom, New Mexico. Then just after that, Clovis, New Mexico, which really pushed things further back. But again, Folsom, New Mexico, we find, evidence of fluted projectile points in situ alongside megafaunal bison remains. All that essentially means is that around 9,000 years ago, there were people in New Mexico hunting large megafaunal bison. And again, these kinds of discoveries, and that was actually George Majunkin, who was a black cowboy, who found those. It took years. Nobody paid attention to him. This guy had said he'd found these whitewashed bones out there, and people are like, oh, okay, that's great. Cowboy says he found some stuff. It wasn't years until a priest who he had known goes out there. Majunkin was dead. He'd actually passed away by that time. And this priest and several other people go out there and they do an informal site survey. They find the bones in the same area, and then an excavation is carried out. And they do find actually in place next to rib bones, I believe, of one of these extinct megafaunal bison antiquus, they find this beautiful little projectile point. And this is what we call the Folsom points, as they're known today. And there, again, the signature, I guess, is this long, what's called a tool-assisted flute, a groove that runs down the length of the blade, which presumably was used in order to haft it onto the end of a spear. But then, shortly after that, we find a young Native American man named James Ridgely Whiteman, who found what he called warheads around Clovis, New Mexico. And he tried to get anthropologists involved. And in fact, actually, a couple from the Smithsonian had gone down there to Clovis. They looked around and said, sorry, kid, I know this seems important, but we don't see enough here really worth excavating. And thanks to, I believe, Jesse Figgins, who I think at that time worked with the Denver Museum of Natural History, if memory serves, they carried out excavations, and sure enough, they found a Clovis occupation. This is, of course, the type site, and hence now we refer to that culture, those projectile points from that. Again, they were like Folsom, but they were larger, a little more crude. The fluting was done differently on those than the later Folsom. And again, the stratigraphy, the level, the depth that they were found indicated around 12,000 years, maybe actually closer to 11 at that time. But we now know that Clovis went back a little earlier. In fact, now in North America, we have evidence, and again, significant evidence of pre-Clovis, pre-fluted, much earlier technologies. But see, that's the point. Alois Hrdlicka, the premier anthropologist of his day, never went to Folsom, never went to Clovis, paid no attention to these new innovative discoveries occurring in the Southwest, which were pushing back the timescale on early human arrivals in North America. Went to his grave, presumably, in complete ignorance, because he didn't want to have to be challenged on the premise that he had laid the groundwork for. And then again, decades later, in 1973, we've got James Adovasio carrying out excavations up there at Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania. And at Meadowcroft, they find evidence of human habitation going back 16,000 years, well in advance of Clovis. And initially, now see, by this time, they've got radiocarbon dating. Obviously, people are like, come on, this can't be. But sure enough, they start finding evidence of Clovis, or pre-Clovis, rather, at that point. And then we go down to South America, and around the same time, Tom Dillahay, who's now with Vanderbilt University in Tennessee, but Tom Dillahay is carrying out excavations at a very significant site called Monte Verde. And again, they find evidence of, and radiocarbon datable evidence in advance of Clovis down there in Chile, too. And so all of a sudden, another paradigm shift begins. And again, I think in science, this is kind of how things go. There is that old guard, that status quo, and then something shakes the entire foundation of everything that we thought we knew. And there are those scientists who say, look, I know this is crazy, but technology has helped us show that this is what it appears to be, and we keep finding more and more evidence of it. But there's always going to be that old guard that goes, no, it can't be, it doesn't, it wasn't, it isn't. No. And you still see that in archaeology and in all kinds of other branches of science these days. And so I think it's really important that if we want to understand how science moves forward, we do have to look to the past. And, you know, my good friend George Howard, just yesterday, we were talking about this. He said past is prologue. And so, yeah, if we want to understand now and where we're going, we do have to look to the past and take, you know, the cues from what we've already seen. The past has unequivocally shown that when changes occur, there are going to be people who are just, they will not look at the new evidence. And then there are those who are willing to look at those new evidences, think outside the box, and look at the implications. That's how we move forward.
Yeah, I was thinking about this too. When it comes to archaeology, I've had people hit me up and they want me to interview people that talk about, like, you know, the giants and the Nephilim and finding all of these strange things. And I said, okay, right. Like I'll look into it. It's fascinating stuff to me. But the thing about this is like a running theme that I find in all of this when it comes to aliens, mysticism, consciousness, archaeology, is when you really dig in and you really start digging into trying to find the real truth of things and do research. It's not like there's not strange things out there, but it isn't as fascinating as what you're seeing in the high YouTube searches. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Look, man, you're spot on. Again, you know, I at one time was as interested in the stories of giants. Now, the problem was, I didn't know that was kind of a loaded term. A lot of people, like you said, they attach the idea of, you know, large human remains to, you know, the Nephilim or to lost races of giants and things like this. I, at very least peripherally, had interest at one time in large human remains. In fact, the aforementioned Aleas Herdlichka had carried out anthropological excavations on the Aleutian Islands where they found large human remains. You know, some of the skulls had been trepanned, where there had been a hole actually, you know, that had been drilled in the top of the skull. This is a very peculiar practice that many ancient cultures around the world nonetheless did. Various different reasons why it's believed they may have done that. But again, Herdlichka himself actually had carried out some of those excavations that recovered large bones. Now, problem, how large are we talking? I mean, really, we're talking no larger than maybe 6 or at most 7 feet tall. I mean, you watch any basketball game these days, you're going to see people that tall. And so that's the thing. There's been some contentious debate about that over the last few years. And, you know, people come after me and say, oh, Micah's a giantologist. Look, again, I don't really even have a dog in that fight. I'll tell you what you will find is that, you know, on the accession card catalog entries, where Herdlichka's name is actually listed, with the discoveries of those skulls, he actually states often things like pathology, or, you know, he'll even more specifically define some of these large skulls, for instance, as macrocephalic or acromegalic. Again, he's describing known growth disorders or other pathologies that can cause cranial swelling, which is a superficial enlargement of the skull. So that doesn't mean that it was necessarily a giant person. Some of these, again, partial human remains that were discovered, a skull by itself that appeared to be very large, it may have just been a person with a very large head. I think the largest one on record was maybe in the neighborhood of 2,100 cubic centimeters, and that was the Graham skull, which is a partial upper portion of a cranium believed to have belonged to an Algonquin Native American sometime long ago. And that's, you know, there are even photographs that exist of that. It's still kept in the off-site storage facility of the Smithsonian. But again, I haven't found any convincing evidence of actual real giants. The other side of that, too, is that there are a lot of cultural mythologies, particularly in South America, that talk about giants that came. There's a Cherokee legend. We mentioned James Mooney and his myth of the Cherokee earlier. They tell a story of what they call the giants from the West, which is kind of interesting because they say that at some time, presumably in pre-Columbian times, that these giants came from the West and stayed with the Cherokees for a while, and that they had slanted eyes, and that they gave them a name which was reminiscent of Sulkalu, which was the Cherokee god of the hunt, which means slant-eyed giant, after this you know, appearance that they had in their facial characteristics. And they said that these giants stayed a while and then they went back to the West, wherever they came from. But the anthropological interpretation of these stories is that these cultural groups over time inflate these stories and mythologize them somewhat. And no doubt there may have been an actual interaction between people from a different place, between different cultural groups. But again, the idea of the giant is sometimes projected onto this for different reasons, especially if there was warfare that was involved. There didn't seem to be that in the case of the Cherokee, but South American legends that talk about giants that arrive, they definitely have a warfare element, a clash between cultures. And it may be the idea that the giant element is projected onto these people in these cultural beliefs as a sort of embellishment of an actual event that may have occurred at an earlier time. So there are different reasons for, I think, that giant motif, but I can guarantee you if I had ever found any evidence of actual, legitimate, large human people that was convincing to me and outside of any kind of known pathologies.
It'd be in a museum somewhere. Yeah.
It would be in a museum, and if I'd found it, I'd surely tell you about it. I'm not part of the conspiracy.
Well, see, that's, and usually this is something that I would talk to you about off air, but that's kind of the predicament that I find myself in doing broadcasting is, when you do broadcasting, you have to keep things interesting. You got to keep things compelled. Everybody knows that, right? When you do the research, right, it isn't, and I hate to use Alex Jones because he gets picked on a lot, like you say, but I can't seem to bring myself to do stuff like that. Like talk about this great grand conspiracy that everybody wants to believe in, or even when it comes to aliens. That's why I talk about consciousness exploration so much, because I know that's real. There's something to it. And everything else, when I look into it, it just isn't as fabricated. It just isn't as fascinating and grandiose as everybody's making it out to be for the most part.
Well, sensation sells. And, inevitably we'll get back around to the search for extraterrestrial life later in the conversation. I mean, look at the cover of National Geographic magazine that just came out. Lauren just pointed this out to me. I mean, literally, there's a radio telescope and the starry sky, and it says, "We are not alone."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is incredible. But I want to touch on something else tangentially related to Alex Jones here, because during the break, you and I were talking about secret societies.
Yeah.
And this is another one of those subjects that people always blow out of proportion. If I say secret society, what is the first alleged secret society that comes to mind? The one inevitably that everyone thinks of, right? I mean, it's the Illuminati.
The Freemasons, you mean? Or
maybe
the Illuminati.
The Illuminati, just because, and again, Adam Weishaupt actually founded the actual Bavarian Illuminati, which really was kind of a sect within Freemasonry. And they were essentially trying to take over aspects of Freemasonry. There have been plenty of secret societies. Now, that whole story, the historical Illuminati, as far as we know, and Robert Anton Wilson had actually talked about this, they seem to have failed. Their whole attempt to, overthrow and destroy the church and all this kind of stuff, it seems to have failed. There's no evidence that they continued on. But if you look at the actual underpinnings of certain modern international organizations, I mean, they're absolutely – let me give you an example. There's a book that was written by Robin Brown, and it's entitled The Secret Society, Cecil John Rhodes' Plans for a New World Order. And this is a great book, a kind of academic historical perspective on Cecil John Rhodes and his working with John Milner and the foundation of what were called the Round Table Groups, or the Milner's Kindergartens, as they were sometimes known. And basically, Cecil John Rhodes' hope was to extend the British Empire to all the corners of the world. That's what he wanted to do. And with these Round Table Groups, this is interesting because historian Carroll Quigley of Georgetown University had written back in the 1960s, I believe, in his book called Tragedy and Hope. He had talked about the fact that, there were the Round Table Groups. And he explicitly says in that book that modern iterations of these roundtable groups would – well, actually, he may have written about this again in the 1980s where he expounded on it. He first talked about it in the 60s. But in one of these writings, Quigley said, a modern example of one of the roundtable groups would be the Council on Foreign Relations. So, again, if you actually trace the history of some of these modern groups that are often associated with conspiracy theories and things, if you trace them far enough back, the actual underpinnings were – a couple of guys who had, again, this kind of British supremacy, sort of this interest in mind. And what was Cecil John Rhodes' secret society called? Wait for it, Joe. This is really a humdinger. The Secret Society. That's the most imaginative name for a secret society ever, right?
Yeah, right.
And that's the reason why on the Middle Theory podcast, people who support the program, we jokingly say that they become members of the world's most secret society. A secret society so secret it actually has no official name. because if you're really going to be secret, you got to do better than calling your secret society the Secret Society. But makes for a great name for a book, doesn't it? Just ask Robin Brown.
Well, even in Freemasonry, when I got involved with it, there were all kinds of different groups. It's, you could start a group and print up certificates, and you could just do several different offshoots of several different things. It's just kind of a bunch of fraternities inside there, right? But it's not that they weren't learning like spiritual and ancient wisdom or knowledge or anything. There were coded message, there were ciphers that you learned, and all kinds of stuff, right? It was cool, but it wasn't. Now, don't get me wrong. I never made it to the tops of any of this stuff. Okay. They very well could be breeding people just to see who they can trust and who they can't trust. I don't know, but just to me, it just seems highly unlikely, man. It just does.
So you mean to tell me you're one of them?
I was one of them. As far as being action, but all that stuff is exoteric, like there's plenty of people that you can live a Freemasonic life without being a Freemason. You can live a Rosicrucian life without ever joining a society. You can learn from these people and live by what they teach. You don't have to join a club, although some people like to join clubs.
Right. And nowadays, too, a lot of that information that was once exclusive to the members of those fraternities, like you mentioned, it's become, the esoteric has become exoteric, and now many people can have access to those kinds of things. And you can get a gist of what, in fact, many in Freemasonry, for instance, are very open about what were once closely guarded secrets. And, again, this is actually kind of a popular subject these days because there is at least still some modicum of a mystique appended to it, whether or not, that I think it is largely superficial in truth. But there is at least, what this appears to be is a continuation of an idea, a tradition that, this knowledge, supreme wisdom is passed on to people. And we want to be very selective about who has access to this information. And so to me, the history of secret societies has been a fascinating thing because as a cultural, you could almost call it a cultural anthropological study in itself. Very much so, in fact. People who find ways of guarding and protecting and controlling who has access to certain information that is passed down to progeny.
I used to think there's a big problem with that, right? Honestly. Like, who are you to tell me that I shouldn't know something, especially if it's true? But once you start learning things like, and I hate to even talk about it, but certain types of consciousness exploration that could be dangerous to your psyche if you're not, let's say, mentally stable, then maybe you don't want to tell people about that. It's like sometimes handing a 5-year-old instead of a BB gun, you hand them a 30-30 or something and say, I'm going to teach you how to shoot a gun. It's not, that's a crazy analogy, but there is some of that in there, right? Humans can't concentrate, just like Manly P. Hall said. Especially in the West, we're not able to concentrate long enough and focus hard enough to do anything dangerous to begin with. But maybe we shouldn't be doing it to begin with sometimes, is what I'm wondering.
Let me put another spin on it, too. Again, the idea of controlling ways that certain people gain access to and then who can pass on certain information. I would ask, how is that any different from the education system in America? When you go to a college, you have to pay or you have to acquire money from organizations, sometimes even fraternities who grant scholarships. And then you go to a college and you do what? Many people actually join fraternities when they actually go to those colleges, but you have to pay to be able to gain access to that information from those teachers of this sacred lore. And then what happens? Then this information published in academic journals is behind a paywall, and only the members are the ones who have access unless you're somebody outside who knows somebody who's on the inside, or you're willing to pay for it from the outside to gain access. But again, still, you don't have the certificate. You don't have the scarlet letter on your chest that shows that you studied under the ancient masters. Point I'm making, even modern education in ways has vestiges of that earlier tradition of sacred knowledge passed down by enlightened ones to select individuals in a controlled manner, right? And again, I think in a culturally anthropological sense, that makes a lot of sense. The secret societies continue today. And so for people who would kind of make fun of it, now, yes, it is absurd sometimes the way that people go way out in left field. And yes, the Illuminati are still controlling the rap industry, Hollywood, all the prisons, and all this stuff. That stuff is silly to me. But the idea that there are real secret societies historically, which also have some relationship to certain international organizations. Again, and I've got an article at my website, micahhanks.com, that talks about, it's a brief history of secret societies where I look at everything from this, the Council on Foreign Relations to the Bilderbergers. Many of these people, including especially the Bilderberg meetings, that first organized by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands back in the 1950s, what it was after the end of the Second World War, they were concerned about rising anti-American sentiment in Europe, and they wanted to promote at first what they called Atlanticism. Harmonious relationships between, again, those who had emerged after the Second World War as the victors. And they knew that Russia wasn't going to be buddying up to them. So, well, yes, our friends over there in the colonies, it's quite obvious that John Cecil Rhodes' plan for a new world order extending the British Empire to the four corners of the globe, even though it's not flat, it's a globe, right? So how does it have four corners? But, so they said, let's buddy up to the victors. Let's make sure that we preserve this relationship we have with America. Let's maintain this, this idea of a Western world. And hence what began as Atlanticism became what we call today globalism. Again, these are the underpinnings of a lot of the conspiracy talk that we see in the world today. That doesn't mean to me that there's a real conspiracy. It means that there is some truth behind it. But see, you find that with all these subjects. There is some truth behind it, but then the Alex Jones comes along.
There's some bias on it. Somebody puts their own political spin or bias to it or what they think. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there was a study that came out a few years ago that found that people who are good at putting together connections where none exist, conspiracy theorists by definition, they're not crazy, they're not stupid. Many times they're actually extremely intelligent because that's what humans do. Humans spot what appear to be patterns. Now, again, science teaches us, or at least we should hope that we learn when we study science, that, causation does not necessarily mean correlation, vice versa. Again, if you see what appears to be a correlation, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a causal relationship there. We've got to be careful about making correlations where no connection actually exists. But the human mind is, after a fashion, it is designed, we have evolved to do just that because that has helped us survive. And so conspiracy theorizing is a natural process that arises from evolutionary characteristics we've developed over time, mental processes that have helped us survive.
See, and you guys thought that Southern people couldn't be articulate, didn't you? You don't know Micah Hanks very well, do you? We're at the top of the hour. When we come back, we are going to continue our discussion on alien life and altered states and a little bit more to come. We'll be right back.
Portion of the show is being brought to you by Ed's Vegetation Therapy Center. In these hectic times, plants are suffering from more stress-related illnesses than ever. So if you've got a neurotic rhododendron, an hysterical hibiscus, or a forlorn fern, call Ed's Vegetable Therapy Center today. Ed's. We help plants cope.
Okay, nurse, let's get this man to the ER stat.
Right away, doctor.
We see this every day. Heart attack or angina pain due to blocked and clogged arteries. Chelation can remove obstructions or blockages from arteries and help avoid painful and expensive surgery. Now there's Angioprim. It's a liquid oral chelation product that you take with juice. You start to feel the results fast. Angioprim increases blood flow all over the body, and that means more energy and strength to take on the day with less aches and pains. 60 years of research has gone into chelation, and Angioprim is the result. A safe and easy way to unblock your veins and arteries from buildup that slow circulation.
Paging Dr. Jones. Please report to the emergency room right away.
Log on now for a special radio offer from Angioprim. That's angioprim.com/radio. ANGIOPRIM. Angioprim.com/radio or call 877-882-7221. That's 877-882-7221.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now. The Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Magic, the occult, history, health, news.
These are just a few subjects discussed on my radio broadcast, The Secret Teachings. I offer unique and objective perspectives on new and old subjects alike, while welcoming guests and presenting my own research with no filter. Visit my website for more information and to subscribe to my archive at www.thesecretteachings.info, and find me on The Fringe FM live Monday through Friday, midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern on The Fringe FM.
The Fringe FM isn't just a radio station. We also provide services for all your audio production needs. If you are interested in live radio or pre-recorded podcasts, we're here to help. We even do audio enhancements and voiceovers if needed. If you want to do a podcast or live radio show and even want the option to syndicate on terrestrial radio, from simple audio file enhancement to live production and call screening, we have you covered. We have worked with some of the best professionals in the business in order to provide coaching instruction for content creation, show structure, and more. Contact The Fringe Digital Media for more at info@thefringe.fm. That's info@thefringe.fm. Or call 501-777-5631 for a consultation.
Hi, this is Sammy. Join us in the Deep South as we're lighting the void with Joe Roop on The Fringe FM.
You know, food was different 60 years ago. It was minimally processed, free of pesticides. It was nourishing and healthful for your body. Today, GMOs, pesticides, herbicides, and heavy processing have depleted the nutrition of our food supply, which takes a toll on our health and energy. It's harder than ever to get the right nutrition. That's what Life Change Tea is meant to counteract. Our specially blended, powerful herbal formulas can give you more energy without caffeine. It's a mild cleanse, a mild daily detox. A good detox can help revive and bring back the energy of your youth. GetTheTea.com is the website. It'll cleanse you from the inside out with this herbal proprietary formula. Go to GetTheTea.com. There's no fillers, no GMOs. It's organic. Not available in stores. You must go to their website, GetTheTea.com. And their supplements are a great way to maintain your health. Read the testimonials on the website. Go to GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Yohoy there, Gigi here.
And I'm Cortana, and we're going to bring you on a journey through all things paranormal, metaphysical, ufology, and even psychedelic on our show,
Shift Happens, live, Fridays at 7 p.m. Pacific. That's 10 p.m. Eastern on The Fringe FM.
And remember, kids, don't feed the Archons. Feed ducks instead.
Duck up.
All right, welcome back to Lighting the Void. We are here with Micah Hanks. Micah Hanks from the Gralien Report, Middle Theory, and KGRA Radio. Micah, there's been a lot of talk of late, as at least from my research, as far as it goes to why we have not found alien life yet, right? And so there's even scientists looking into this they're saying maybe we need to change what we view as life really is, right? And so I've got what I got here for you, and I made this especially for you, is the reasons why we haven't found alien life. But before we get into that, why do you I just want to hear your theory on this, because look, we know there's all kinds of planets out there, man, just thousands and thousands of planets, tons of them that could have life on it, but yet we really haven't found alien life. Now, people will say, well, what about the abductees? What about people like Strieber and all them? But I'm just talking about from an academic point of view, we have not. And so now they're trying to change all their theories that maybe we need to start looking at life as something totally different than just life as a human. It's a big subject going on right now, actually.
Well, it is, and it's one that I've spent a lot of time over the last several years thinking about. Really, I mean, ever since childhood. And I'll say this too. I draw a line, with all due respect to my friends in the ufological community, between claims of alien contact, between, again, those who would call themselves experiencers. I've got very good personal friends who say they've had these experiences. Now, again, like I say respectfully, do I have some doubts about some of those experiences, depending on the individuals? Sure. Have I worked closely with some people to try and help them understand the true nature of what those experiences may or may not be? Yes. Have I met some of the leading alleged abductees that have been, again, popularized in UFO lore over the years? Yeah, some of the biggest ones, Whitley Strieber and most notably Travis Walton, who I've spent a fair amount of time with, and I really find him to be a wonderful human being. I've enjoyed every interaction I've ever had with Travis Walton. And I also think that there are aspects of his story that are truly compelling to me for various reasons, although I don't know that I interpret the meaning behind them like many of my colleagues in the UFO community would.
What do you mean on that?
Well, I would merely say that I think that Travis Walton describes an experience that he really had. I don't necessarily think it was hallucinatory. I think that it involved some kind of a physical experience. But to me, if you really look at what he describes, it does not necessarily point to an extraterrestrial experience. I mean, let's just get down to brass tacks, what he described primarily on that craft. Initially, the minute he wakes up, he's disoriented, and he said that there were some beings in the room, and he described these as conforming mostly to the idea of, the popular gray alien of, UFO literature of the last several decades. But when he actually has his wits about him and he's actually aware of what's going on in the room around him, from that point forward, what he describes seeing are people. I mean, he says they were the epitome of their gender. They look just like you or I, men and women. That always was interesting to me. The way one could interpret that experience, in other words, to me, is some kind of an experimental aircraft with people on board. And some of the other things that he describes, which included, for instance, an oxygen mask being placed over his mouth and anesthesia being administered. I mean, these are all very human experiences that he's having on board a so-called extraterrestrial spacecraft.
So he could have possibly been picked up by one of our own in an experiment.
This, or again, like what Travis says, because again, when that film, based on his book, and let me say very loosely based on that book, that's one of the premises of his lecture that he's given over the years, that book, again, his experiences rather were so different from what they show in that film. And let's be clear, the movie made it into a horror story because his true story, as he told it at least, and really, I mean, he's the only one who knows whether that's true or not. But again, I'm not into one of these. What really gets on my nerves, I guess, is the way that people take a story that seems so far outside of their reality that when a Travis Walton comes along sharing his experience, they say, well, you're obviously a liar. Is that really fair? I mean, are there not other ways we could interpret that experience? Well, one is the way that he interprets it. It wasn't an experiment, wasn't an abduction. He says, I ran out there, a young kid, a young buck, I run out under this thing and I see it. And he says that obviously it, like an electric arc appeared, it grounded basically. And there I was underneath it. And he says, I got zapped. He said they picked me up because he believes that he might have died had they not. He said, I think it was basically at that point, from that point forward, after he gets zapped, a rescue mission. That's how he refers to it. So there's the Hollywood version of the little, monsters on board this spaceship. And then there's what Travis describes, people on board an aircraft, an experience where he couldn't tell you exactly what happened, but he certainly felt that they saved his life, not an abduction, not a UFO abduction. There was a weird aircraft involved, but whose was that? I'm going to tell you, I mean, there's a big clue when you say that there are what look like people on board that. Maybe that we should consider that possibility. So, at least for my own part, that's based on not only careful review of what he describes, which sure it does sound outlandish, especially to people who are not familiar with a wide variety of different similar reports from UFO literature. But again,
actually sounds more probable to me than aliens, just to be honest with you.
Let's put it in that context. Again, it sounds so outlandish until you compare it to other instances. Yeah, exactly like you said in the literature. Once we look at the specifics of his experience, it's like, well, this actually sounds, at least we could agree, more probable than a lot of, similar things that have been reported in UFO literature over the decades. Now, the fundamental point I want to make, though, is that I've met Travis many times, and I find him to be a good person, a friendly person, a very sincere individual. I would like to think that if he had that experience, there's a way we could rationalize it without changing the narrative. But again, the narrative he gives us already presents, without having to change anything, plenty of clues that I think, if it's interpreted correctly, could at least point to an interpretation of the case that makes sense. But that said, with all due respect to my friends in ufology, I think many people get hung up on the UFO aspect in the search of, the search for alien life. And I think sometimes it's important to separate the so-called abductions or the firsthand, close encounters of the third kind, separate those things from sightings of unidentified flying objects. And then further, because we don't really know what they are or what their origin is, if these things exist, let's separate the so-called UFOs or UAP, unexplained aerial phenomena, separate that from the search for extraterrestrial life too. I'm not sure that we're all talking about the same thing here. Point in case, why are the experiences of the DMT trippers, people who hallucinate and have these vivid experiences, these entheogenic experiences under the influences of something like dimethyltryptamine, why do those people describe sometimes, not always, but sometimes an experience remarkably similar to an alien abduction or a mystical experience, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, all these kinds of things? There is a certain commonality to these kinds of weird experiences. On the other hand, then there are the astronomers out there that are looking at distant stars and looking to the best of their ability, scientifically, technologically, otherwise, for evidence of alien life, intelligent life somewhere out there. And we're getting close. We feel like we're real close, but we haven't really conclusively been able to nail it down.
Right.
And that's where the problem arises for me. We spend so much time looking up if UFOs do it, and maybe they do. I can't say that they don't, but if what we were looking at was, without question, good evidence of extraterrestrial life, shouldn't we be seeing more of it out there too?
Well,
that's where
exactly. I mean, like I said, they know there are millions, perhaps, I guess you could say billions of planets in the universe that could sustain life. So, and I guess in the long timing of everything, why hasn't any of this life made it far enough? Why haven't we seen it? Why haven't we shaken hands with an alien by now? Right. So they've got there's all these different theories that you see in the community. Like the aliens are hiding in underground oceans, or they are imprisoned on these planets called super Earths, which that one was a new one to me. Or we've done killed all the aliens already. And so when you actually ask logical questions about it, then comes out all these theories. But the truth of the matter is we see all these planets now, and a lot of them can sustain life, but we don't see aliens, so to speak. So maybe we need to change our definition of what life really is.
Well, absolutely. And again, not to make yet another parallel to archaeology, but, I'm interested with regard to any of the sciences. I'm interested in the history of science and the history of also the philosophy of science. But the history of the development of science is something that's really important to me. And so when we look at archaeology, I use it as an example because it is a fairly recent science. Throughout the 19th century, there was no formal archaeology per se. It was mostly what was called, the antiquarian groups, people who had a love for the past, but they were mostly art aficionados and people who were collectors of artifacts and things. And actually, to tell you the truth, in many instances, glorified looters. But the reason I bring that up in relation to this discussion is because around 1962, there had been a much more systematic and formal approach brought to archaeology between the beginning of the 20th century and the early 1960s. But then Louis Benford comes along, an American archaeologist, and he says, whoa, guys, we need to really look at the role archaeology can play as anthropology. And he begins to institute a lot of changes and approaches, theoretical approaches to archaeology, which really kind of helped solidify the science of what became archaeology. And this begins, again, this is one of these paradigm shifts we were talking about earlier, where all of a sudden it goes from just merely kind of collecting and categorizing, it goes into what's called the processual period of archaeology. And then thereafter that, we also have another period, which we're reportedly in right now, the post-processual archaeology period. But when you look at that, it's kind of fascinating because I would say that, again, archaeology went from just guys who were collecting things to guys who started being much more systematic about what they were collecting, to people who then started saying, well, now we need to process this data. I'm reading about the history of archaeology and going, man, I've read, in books about UFO experiences and the search for extraterrestrial life. I have seen the same pattern, and I've always thought that. It started off with people who were just, grasping at straws, trying to throw theories around, and then people started kind of collecting the reports, and people kind of start putting the reports in different categories. So we've got CE1s, daylight discs, CE2, CE3, Gell and Hynek and Jacques Vallée, and scientists get involved and start really trying to look at it, but still we aren't quite really putting this all together. And here we are in the 21st century, still kind of going about ufology, for instance, like people did for the last half of the last century. And only now are we kind of gradually beginning to see some people going, okay, if science were going to be applied to this, how can we utilize analytical processes, computer-aided analytical processes to help determine information from all this data we've collected? I would love to be able to think that we're going to be going into a processual period with ufology. And apart from that, in the sciences, the astronomers and the astrobiologists and those in the scientific community who are looking at the possibility that alien life may exist out there, that they're going to be doing something similar, that they're going to be open-minded enough and brave enough to come forward and say, like, again, on the cover of National Geographic this week, hey, we are not alone. The likelihood that life exists somewhere out there is far too great for us to dismiss any longer. We've got to now proceed in a way that is going to help us find the best evidence for it.
Exactly.
I hope, that's what I'm saying. And what this is it's a broader commentary on the way that science evolves over time. Often when you are faced with a new kind of study where a new kind of science must be instituted. Have you watched the new program, Project Blue Book, by the way, on history?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I watched the whole thing.
Great show. And again, at one point, our version of Dr. Gell and Hynek that appears on the program, he actually says to his cohort, roughly based on J. Edward Rippold, Major Quinn, he says to him, we're building a new science right now. So I'm kind of, making these terms as we go along. But that's exactly what I think we're seeing, both with astrobiology and the search for extraterrestrial life, and also perhaps with ufology. I mean, these are things that science can be applied to, but we are getting to a point, first of all, where they have to be taken seriously enough that there's enough credibility associated with said subject that people can feel comfortable applying science to them. And that's been, I think, a great impediment, whether it's UFO studies here on Earth or looking out there for alien life. Both of these have been hindered by the fact that people simply have treated these subjects as though they were incredible. But now we're starting to see a bit of a shift. Maybe we're getting close, at least, to the processual period for these, right?
Yeah, well, I'm totally with you on that. I mean, it's cool to be in the paranormal and UFO field and be that person that's named, well, we think outside the box. And look, I base everybody's truth on their experience, right? That, or at least my truth. But when it comes to gathering data, the truth of humanity, and getting down to the truth so we can evolve, we definitely need a way to measure these things. We definitely need a science behind it. We definitely need some type of evidence. It's very important. And I don't think a lot of people in the UFO community realize just how important it is for the future of this planet. Because it's really cool to be in that community where, you're outside the box. Well, I think the planet needs to get outside the box. And the people that are doing things like a noetic science and stuff, they feel the same way. For instance, Dean Radin and all, they feel the same way. They want this stuff to be measured. They want us to move forward. They feel these things are important, but sometimes you upset people when you start asking for evidence. Like they get bent out of shape about it.
Yeah, some people do. And, again, I with love, because I've got friends, and again, I've written books and I've written articles that look at the UFO UAP aspect of this. And again, I want to be very clear in the reason I make those distinctions between UFOs and the search for extraterrestrial life. Again, there are many scientists who have been for decades involved in search for alien life elsewhere beyond Earth, in the fields of astronomy or astrobiology. Then again, while the UFO phenomena, one interpretation of what that may be, what its origin may be, one interpretation may be the so-called extraterrestrial interpretation. I think we need more data before we can draw that conclusion. Now, that's why I say with love, when I'm talking about my friends in the UFO community, I mean, I've got a lot of friends, but the problem I see with ufology in general is that rather than people who are trying to collect and correlate and process data, make analytical determinations about what the data means, utilize a deductive reasoning process to infer what is most likely about the data that we have collected, and we can come to conclusions, evidence-based conclusions, essentially applying a scientific process to what we've gathered. Unfortunately, ufology remains what it, again, like I said, has been for the last half of the last century. It's people who have theories, and good at times though some of those theories are, they often are not put through a scientific kind of process in which there are tests for falsehood and there are, again, deductive reasoning processes that help determine what is most likely. It seems to be instead every man for himself. Let's just put theories out there, and then we write a book and build a website, and then we have a TV show, and then we get hired to go give talks at conferences. Look, I've done that too. I'm doing less of it these days, though, admittedly, because I'm a little tired of everybody just, if you're going to make it in this field, you got to write a book, and then you got to go do conferences, and then you got to sell T-shirts, and you got to try and make money doing it. Look, each person can make money if they want to. That's up to each individual. But if we're really serious about what this phenomenon may represent, we need to treat it seriously, more seriously than it has been in the past.
I think it's ironic, too, that you brought up Travis Walton about this whole thing, because a lot of people bring him up. But I remember one of the biggest running things that he says is, like when we interviewed him at the Ozark UFO conference, he said, the main thing that I want to tell everybody is, look, this stuff is really happening. There's something really going on here, and we need to find a way to show this to everybody. He wasn't really all bent on just staying on this side of the fence, and I don't care who doesn't believe me or whatever. He wants to be validated, and you got to think just how tired he is of certain things, he's always been getting pushback his whole life. And when he first had that experience, it wasn't easy for him. He had to come to this community to be welcomed, but in his heart, even to this day, I feel like to him, it's still important for him that we figure out a way to expose this information where everybody can accept it.
Yes, that is true. I would also say again, every person wants to have a sense of community. They want to feel like they belong to a bigger community. And again, that to me is one of the problems inherent to ufology, that, if you're going to be in this community, there's some wiggle room, but for the most part, you still got to kind of be in this narrow margin of, this is what you believe if you're going to be one of us. My interactions, now granted, what he discusses at the events, Travis doesn't necessarily bring a scientific approach, but then again, he's not necessarily a scientific, thinker or a trained scientist, but he's, again, a highly intelligent person. A historian may not necessarily follow a, scientific approach like a biologist would do, or, like a chemist would do, but that historian nonetheless in their own discipline can very intelligently approach and very scientifically also approach a subject. Every person in different disciplines approach problems differently. I get it. So what I'm saying is that, he may not be a physicist or a chemist or an astrobiologist in the way he approaches it. But again, Travis, I think admirably and very intelligently discusses his experience and wants to say, look, first of all, I do want to try and make this less sensational than the film based on my experience made it. He said he will tell you he thinks that film kind of did a lot of harm in that regard. He wants to bring it kind of back down to earth, no pun intended. And he wants to speak very matter-of-factly. But the other thing he'll tell you is, hey, I'm also still trying to learn. I'm still trying to gain information. And that's what I get from Travis. Sure, he goes to conferences, he gives talks, he sells books. Like I said, to each of their own. It's not bad for someone to write books. Hey, I've written books. To sell those books, I always hope to sell books. To give lectures at conferences, I've done plenty of that too. But my experience at those conferences, and I bet you that Travis would agree with me on a bunch of this too, the problem is that seems to be this little culture industry that, rather than moving our knowledge base on this subject forward, is built more around just hype, speculation, the fun of getting to put on your antennae or your tinfoil hat and going and feeling like you're at home with a bunch of people where you can kind of have this alternate version of yourself. That little culture industry, fun though it is, that's maybe not the best way to move things forward. Travis definitely is trying to move things forward, I think, with the way he discusses and approaches the subject.
Yeah, that's what I got from him too, because I only got to interview him once, but when I did ask back then, I would ask these, well, what do you believe? Do you believe in aliens? I was asking because I was new to the ufology back then. And, he just kind of gave me the look like, that's not what's important to me is, that this happened and that we need to figure out what's going on. And that was it. It was real simple for him. This happened.
Yeah.
We need to figure out what it is. Right. That's all.
It's a certain dispassion that he has, and that's something I've always appreciated. He's not sitting there telling you, these are archons or these are from Zeta 2 Reticuli, and here's the message they gave me. I mean, and that's what impresses me about the way he tells that story. It is very atypical. And some would criticize it and say, well, it doesn't conform to the other memes of ufology, and so here's this outlier. Well, rather than being an outlier, to me, again, there's a credibility factor that's inherent to that. A lot of the woo-woo aspects of the modern mythology of alien abduction, not to say that it's all mythological, but inevitably, like the stories from the ancient past that, people since time immemorial have told, they are based perhaps on a real experience that occurred thousands of years ago, but as they're carried on through oral traditions and embellished over time, the mythologization occurs. It's built onto the original telling of the tale. And that's part of the problem with ufology, too. People's innate tendency to put patterns and connections together, sometimes where none exist. They build narratives around observations, and before long, you've got this story of these aliens, and all of a sudden we know where they come from, why they're here, what they're doing, all the genetic experiments they're carrying out on people, and yet that they love us and that they want to save us from ourselves. Again, none of that, well, mostly none of that, is in the Travis Walton narrative. His story is very different. And it's sometimes I think those outliers we should maybe pay more attention to, especially when they have some of the details like he gives in his story. Now, again, I can't prove that what happened to Travis Walton is authentic. I have no way of proving that, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you, therefore I believe it. But I am going to tell you that from my interactions with him and the way that he tells that story and all the other things aforementioned, it is of interest to me in the broader relationship to the UFO study that I think is necessary to move the science forward if it is ever to become a science, rather than to just remain as a culture industry where people sell books and, go to events and hang out and get drunk.
Fair enough.
And talk about UFOs.
Well said. Well said. We're halfway through the show already, guys. I will ask your questions. I know we got a couple of text ins here. We're with Micah Hanks. Go check out his website, micahhanks.com, also gralienreport.com. We'll be right back.
Out there.
There's something out here.
And so are we. KTOK Digital Broadcasting, The Fringe FM.
All right, everyone. This is Justin from the UK. Excuse the chitty. If you're into the Fringe and you want to hear the brass tacks, my old China plate, Joe Roop and his guests on Light in the Void will open your mince pies. You need to shut your north and south and use your 10-speed gears and listen to them bubble. You could hear a Barry Crocker, no Brussels, but he ain't no holy friar. Anyway, you beat a Barnaby Rudge and take a butcher's.
This is Paranormal News. I'm John Jeter.
Engines effects on Mon-Thurs, lift off.
And liftoff. We have liftoff of Nick Hague, Christina Cook, and Alexei Ovchinin, now on their way to the International Space Station.
A Soyuz rocket carrying 3 crew members from America and Russia blasted off to the International Space Station on Thursday. The success comes 5 months after Commander Alexei Ovchinin and engineer Tyler Nick Hague had to abort the previous launch, and eject to safety. The rocket docked at the ISS in just under 6 hours after launching from Kazakhstan. The trio, who will be on the station until this October, met up with 3 other astronauts working on the space station. Together, the 6-person crew is scheduled for 3 spacewalks over the coming weeks. Commander Oleg Kononenko and Canadian astronaut David Saint-Jacques and flight engineer Anne McLean are expected to return to Earth in the final week of June. Another crew is set to blast off to the ISS in early July. Well, What if we could turn back time, man? The weekend would be extra long, and we'd feel like deja vu was happening all over again.
That's awesome.
I wonder what that would do for daylight savings time.
Do you have the time?
Scientists claim they have reversed the direction of time with a quantum computer, seemingly contradicting the laws of physics and changing our understanding of the universe. The team from Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology, along with colleagues in Switzerland and the U.S., used electrons and quantum mechanics to turn back time. Lead researcher Dr. Gorday Lisovic says we have artificially created a state that evolves in a direction opposite to that of the thermodynamic arrow of time. Cool. Now let's hope this holds up for further testing here, because I'd really like to go back. About 20 years would be good. Read these stories and more at ParanormalRadio.com. I'm John Jeter, and this is Paranormal News.
Poor water quality is a major health issue, and it's only getting worse. Municipalities can't keep up, standards have dropped, and pollutants are increasing. Where does it all end? It ends by keeping the pollutants outside of your home with HydroCare's advanced systems available at Wave Home Solutions. No less than the best purification materials and processes have been developed by HydroCare to provide you with healthy, clean water for drinking, cooking, and showering. HydroCare far surpasses the competition in removing chlorine, odors, iron, lead, chemicals, limescale, and much more. Don't settle for less when it comes to your water. We'll take care of the toughest water problems for you, whether it's from a city or well source. Satisfaction guaranteed. For more information, call 888-997-WAVE. That's 888-997-WAVE. Or go to bestwater123.com. That's bestwater123.com.
Wave Home Solutions for a healthy, comfortable home.
Hey, Fringe FM listeners, did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or no Wi-Fi available, you can still listen to every minute of the Fringe FM by calling 701-719-3971. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. Saves your data plan and no extra cost if you have unlimited minutes. Call 701-719-3971. That's 701-719-3971. Listen to the Fringe FM on any phone, anytime, anywhere.
You're listening to Lighting the Void Radio.
Follow The Fringe FM on Facebook and Twitter at The Fringe FM. The Fringe FM loves hearing from you. Have a suggestion, comment, or question? We're all ears. Email talkback@thefringe.fm.
Your home has needs. It needs a healthy, dry environment all year round. Start by getting rid of the worst air in the basement and crawl space, where the problems begin and make the whole house sick. Introducing the new Smart Wave Ventilation Unit. It has advanced technologies to continuously reduce moisture, mold, and odors, and expel radon, gases, and pollutants. And now, Wave units include carbon monoxide detection to automatically expel air at a high rate and send you an alert. It also has an app so you can remotely monitor the conditions. Wave is a comprehensive, maintenance-free, affordable solution that will transform your entire home. Protect your home and family with what it needs. Give it a new Smart Wave Ventilation Unit. For more information, call 888-717-WAVE. That's 888-717-WAVE. Or go to dryhealthyhome.com. That's dryhealthyhome.com.
Wave Home Solutions for a healthy, comfortable home.
Want to know what's on The Fringe FM? Check out our schedule at thefringe.fm.
All right, as always, if you want to chime in on this conversation, the call-in number is open. It's 1-800-588-0335, toll-free from U.S. or Canada. The text line is 501-777-5631. We're here with the one and only Micah Hanks. Yeah, just talking about the UFO field, I think because we're having this conversation, we are making progress. And I do feel like that we are making progress in this field a little bit. If you take, for example, the To the Stars thing, they're about to do another TV show, right? So they're going to do a TV show with Luis Elizondo, Micah. They're going to do this whole thing, and they're going to present it on TV with new stuff. Well, there's already people just bashing away. But I'm noticing that more people are saying, well, look, before we start just bashing the living crap out of these guys, let's see what they come to the table with, and then we can make fun of them if we want. At least we're getting somewhere, right? There's too much, predisposed stuff before anything happens, before we even get the information, I think, too.
Yeah, I'm always a fan of reserving judgment until we have something in front of us, and then we can critique it. I've been a victim of that, where I announce that I intend to do a project and people preemptively attack before they even know what I have done, and then are remarkably, mysteriously quiet perhaps after the project comes out and they realize they have nothing to nitpick. The thing is, though, I think it's always important to give people a chance. And to his credit, unlike most people who are hosts on television programs on history, Luis Elizondo has a background in government. That said, if I look at the track record of other UFO-related programming that has appeared on history, especially in recent years, I would say I'm not particularly impressed, barring maybe one example, and that would be Project Blue Book. But again, that is a drama, a series very, very, very loosely based on some things, according to certain conjectures, may be sort of fact-based. Now, people would say, what do you mean sort of fact-based? Project Blue Book was very real. Come on. The Lubbock Lights were very real. Well, again, yes, these were cases that were popular in the Blue Book files. And yes, the U.S. Air Force Project Blue Book carried out between 1952, I believe, and 1968 or thereabouts, maybe 1969. Again, yes, this is, historically speaking, a real thing, but that program has taken extreme liberties with it. The problem to me is that I would say exactly the same thing about the supposedly real UFO programming they've produced, especially with regard to, and it's not so much UFOs as it is Ancient Mysteries, but the program Ancient Aliens, they take extreme liberties with the facts. They really do. And so if we see the fictional stuff based on reality, and then the reality stuff, which seems at times more based on fiction, they essentially do the same thing and take extreme liberty with what the actual true narratives were. Again, the track record that history has with programming along these lines does, I think, raise some concerns. So while I'll say I'm on alert, I will withhold judgment until I've seen the program. I just hope it turns. Yeah. I'm
on alert, too, because they're making a TV show out of it, number one. If it's that important, they show the preview of them going, come on, folks, this is real. Wake up. If you're really that passionate about it, why didn't you tell us? Why don't we have this information now? Why are you waiting to go on History Channel about it? Why didn't you do a press release?
I could tell you why. Because I don't think that it was in the original plan for To the Stars that they would. And you know what? Here's the best way we can disseminate this to the public. Soft disclosure, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go. History Channel's on board. We're going to do a TV show. No, I bet you that was a late stage development. That's it. And then they incorporate that into the plan. But when they launched To the Stars Academy, they're like, okay, we're going to try and, raise some money. We're going to do some research. We've got some guys, like Hal Puthoff, and Luis Elizondo. These guys worked in government, and we can maybe do something and bring some advanced, principles to the forefront of public awareness as it relates to things government may have already worked on, and some applications for space travel that may already be UFO-like technologies. Oh, cool. Who's this guy, Luis Elizondo? He worked with the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. Let's offer him a TV deal. And, if it's somebody like Lou Elizondo associated with Tom DeLonge, somebody like that could probably command a hefty, fee for his appearance on a program like that, more so than a Micah Hanks or a Joe Roop, presumably. And sure, it becomes an attractive thing. And then they say, well, we will reach a lot of people if we do this. Why don't we incorporate this into our method and our message that we're attempting to present to people? Bam, got a TV show. Now, again, I've been offered more TV shows and more opportunities to appear on them than I could probably count. And I probably, and I'm not, this is no way meant to be braggadocious in any, you know, all I'm saying.
Brag away, man. Do it. Do it.
It's not that, though. And actually, you know, I really prefer not to. I don't respond to many TV inquiries I get. And it's for the same reason that, as I've told you off the microphone, a lot of radio inquiries I get, I'm selective about what I will do. And the reason why is because if somebody contacts me and says, Micah, you know, I have been following your archaeological work, and I'm with a film company, and we're interested in doing a documentary series on, you know, the Mississippian culture and the mound sites that are associated with the Mississippian culture.
You're all over.
We want a real anthropological, you know, with an educational bent. You know, here's our age group that we're shooting for, and we want to try and do an educational television program that looks at, you know, the real, maybe some mysterious stuff, but we're going to look at the real anthropology and the real archaeology, you know, the science behind this. Great. But the problem is instead I always get these, you know, queries where it's like, we're looking to do a reality television program that's looking for evidence that aliens live among us. And we're looking for a, you know, and it's always like, okay, here's a prepackaged silly idea. And we want to see if you'd be interested, and let's just put this email out to 18 different guys and gals and see who bites. You know, it's always this, again, this freeze-dried UFO hunt TV show concept. You know, one of our exciting producers at our UK-based production company wants to talk to you about your interest in being part of this program. And so I always come back to him and I'm like, okay, well, here are some things I want to ask you. Do you have scripts that I have to read? Do I get to share what I actually think on camera, or are you going to feed, you know, give me a canned version that I'm supposed to regurgitate in front of the camera for you? All right. Sure. So then we get to the interview phase. Great. Here we are. We're in the interview phase. Micah, tell us what you think. Did the aliens build the pyramids? And when I tell them no and why they didn't, you know, their eyes glaze over. And we've got room for skeptics on this show. I just got to, you know, I got to figure out where we can fit you in. Look, I'm going to have my producer call you back next week. And so I just found this wonderful this technique that I like to employ when this kind of happens. When they contact me and it looks like one of these freeze-dried offers, I don't email them back. I don't call. I don't accept the phone calls.
You're not becoming part of the problem.
Give me a legitimate, and it doesn't have to be about archaeology. I mean, if a legitimate program pitch for a UFO related show came along, I would love to be involved. But they are never that. It's always, we want good skeptics, and we want you to say exactly what you think. But as soon as I tell them, we haven't really.
We can't sell that. Don't say that. Yeah, I get it, man.
God, don't give us the truth. Nobody wants to hear the truth. We want to be lied to. We want to be treated like idiots. The problem is the viewership is far more intelligent than these producers and these companies give them credit. And people are tired of this BS. People want to be enlightened as well as being entertained. Give me a TV show that gives me the opportunity to enlighten and educate. I'd be all on board. I haven't seen one yet.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of and see, I'll bring up another subject that kind of gets under my skin a little bit because I study the esoteric and the occult quite a bit. Is this whole thing about the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, right? It's widely popular now. There's so many people talking about it. Well, back in the day, there was only a couple of people talking about it. But the Emerald Tablets of Thoth is not the Emerald Tablet. Like the Hermetic Emerald Tablet is something totally different. Like this is channeled material that has a backstory that cannot be verified in any type of way, written by, I think his name's Claude Doggins or whatever. And there are people taking this thing as an ultimate truth and building it, building programs, all kinds of stuff around it. And I'm thinking, God, we're never going to get past this phase. We've got to get past this.
Yeah. Here's another one for you. The idea of the ancient Indian epics containing references to flying machines, Vimanas. Now, it is true that some of the Hindu epics do describe people flying through the sky and vehicles, chariots that could carry them through the sky. And yes, those were referred to at times as Vimanas. But that word Vimana also had different meanings too. Sometimes it referred to a sanctuary area within like a tower or a temple. There were different meanings of that word Vimana. And furthermore, the assertion that there were technological components to these so-called vimanas that is on par with modern aviation standards, helicopters, again, heavier than aircraft, things like this. A lot of that comes from a document called the Vimanika Shastra, which was not an ancient Hindu document. It was actually a supposedly channeled manuscript, once again, sound familiar, from the early part of the last century. And again, in an era post-discovery of aviation, this channeled manuscript comes out, supposedly providing all these, and again, a lot of them are actually nonsensical technological details about these supposed ancient Indian flying aircraft. And yet on the Ancient Aliens program, you'll see them utilizing this, and they may actually refer to it as being a channeled document, but if you really get the full history, no one would look at that and go, this is a credible source for information that there were lost flying technologies from ancient Egypt or ancient India, or Egypt for that matter, or anywhere else. That's the whole problem. Again, you can take something that looks really good on paper, so to speak, take it, out of context and give people just enough facts. Don't count on them to do the rest of the research themselves. Again, you can weave a narrative like that around almost anything. That doesn't make it plausible. And so like what you're talking about with these emerald tablets of Thoth, same sort of a thing. It's a very questionable source anyway, but it's sensational enough in the way that it sounds that people get hung up on that. And like you say, it's almost impossible to move past it at that point.
Yeah, it gets to the point. Like, see, I get it. Like when I read the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, I thought it was a fascinating esoteric text, right? It really was I even had a UFO experience once while reading it. I don't know if what it was that I saw. To me, it was a great mystical text, right? But the backstory, I never thought was 100% true. I never thought like that stuff really mattered to me anyways, but I never went around pushing it as an ultimate truth to our existence. Right. Because you can't. I just don't think you should. And I think what happens is, I don't think people sometimes intentionally mean to do this, but a subject matter gets so big that I think some of these media companies just jump on it. And then, some of these people, they decide to go that route. They decide to do the whole TV show thing and all this stuff. And next thing you know, I don't think they understand the responsibility of what they're saying and doing. Maybe. I don't know.
No, I think you're spot on, Joe. And I've known people who have done these TV shows and gone, well, Mike, I didn't agree with everything that the producers were telling me that we were going to cover, but I felt like I could maybe put my own spin on it. Or even if I had to kind of phrase things the way that they wanted to, which we knew was sensational as we were going into this project, we knew it was sensational, but we went with it anyway because we felt that the greater good was getting, awareness out about our work and what we were trying to do. And so we went ahead and we did the TV show. Okay, great. So in other words, you are this, but you're deciding to go ahead and do that instead because, well, dang, it's TV. Now I'm not trying to criticize my friends. I've got a lot of good friends who've gone on, and some of them have gone on really good television shows. Yeah. It's also not to say that all the TV shows are bad, and I'm particularly critical of Ancient Aliens. But again, I've got a lot of people I know who I really respect who have actually been on that show, and that program from time to time also features people in the sciences, people in architecture and engineering, people who are skeptically oriented. They do try and feature people from a diverse array of backgrounds. The problem is that the general narrative that the program presents is one that I think is highly credulous. And so, and again, I've not only been asked to be on that show, and I've had long discussions with the producers, but they, to this day, continue to call me from time to time looking for new guests who are willing to go on the show if I'm not willing to. In fact, I think it was early last year or maybe late 2017, Jason Pentrail and I were on our way to the College of, actually it was University of South Carolina at Columbia. We were on our way to meet some friends of ours in the archaeological community there at the university, and I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize, and it was a producer from Ancient Aliens. Micah, hey, look, we're trying to find a guest for our upcoming season, and we wondered if you had any contacts in some part of the world. Needless to say, I was busy and couldn't call them back, Joe. But I mean, right. They always got an ear to the ground looking for different things. I will tell you this: there was one offer that I got a couple of years ago that if I could have done it, I would love to have. They were looking for someone who would go live in the jungles of Brazil for 6 months, following in the path of Percy Fawcett's Lost City of Z.
You were willing to do that?
I would have been absolutely willing to go live in the jungle for 6 months in search of Percy Fawcett's Lost City of Z. The problem was, realize how much I would have had to put on hold with the podcasts. There was no way I could do 6 months in the jungle away from civilization, filming. But, again, David Gran wrote a wonderful book about this called The Lost City of Z. And the whole story of Percy Fawcett and his belief that there was this lost city there in the jungles. I mean, it still fascinates me to this day. David Gran, again, I recommend that book so highly to people. The book, by the way, far better than the film of the same title. Just
you don't regret not going and doing that? I would. I think you should have went.
Again, what's interesting is I'm far more up to speed on, as far as my archaeological knowledge and my South American archaeological knowledge. We just actually did an interview with Dr. David Carballo last week, who actually led excavations at the Tlahinga area, which were essentially the apartments in the rural sector adjacent to the main temple complex down there at Teotihuacan, right? And talking with him, you talk about a fascinating discussion. And if you've seen this new series, Native America, on PBS, he's actually featured on that series. But some of the fascinating things that we talked about was the fact that, again, one of the actual preeminent varieties of stone that you find in that part of the world, again, this in the ancient, not Mayan, Aztec Empire, had been obsidian. You still see a lot of obsidian down there these days, and there was archaeological evidence, indisputable, that there had been obsidian from Teotihuacan found in Spiro Mound during excavations, presumably post-looted at Spiro Mound. It's a sad story. I mean, there's untold wisdom that could have been gleaned from the past at the excavations at Spiro Mound had it been excavated before it was partially destroyed by looters, the true scourge of archaeology.
Sounds like another Library of Alexandria story. We lost some information.
If we think it's horrible that a library burns in the ancient past and we lose information, looters are on par with that to archaeologists, and really I think to anyone. But long story short, obsidian from, again, Mesoamerica was found in Spiro Mound, which does present a very unique archaeological link between these areas of the world and the cultures that resided there. So again, real archaeology often does show us remarkable things. That's not aliens, it's not giants, but that to me is remarkable nonetheless.
Getting some text ins here. One that looks like from the Stockton area in California. I don't think that's just the area code. Maybe you don't live there, but I don't think aliens built the pyramids. But what does Micah think?
Well, I don't think that aliens built the pyramids, but I know someone who does. No, again, the thing about that, and actually we did the most recent episode of the 7 Ages Audio Journal, in fact, actually was based on a book by L. Sprague de Camp from a number of decades ago called The Ancient Engineers. We actually get into some of that. And again, I would simply say this. There is still conjecture about who built the pyramids, not in terms of actually, what culture. The conjecture is whether it was slaves or whether it had been people who saw their service, again, to the ancient Egyptian society at that time as more like a tax, almost like, a national draft, something like that. These people may have been, again, doing work, and they may have felt obligated to do it, but not necessarily that it was something they wanted to do. Professor Barry J. Kemp, in his wonderful book, Ancient Egypt and Anatomy of a Civilization, he says it kind of depends on what you call slavery. But one thing that we also know is that there were basically what would be on par with almost ceremonial tombs granted to some of the architects. And the earliest, of course, that goes back to probably Imhotep. Imhotep had essentially been tasked with building what became what we call the step pyramids, which are far more rigid and simple in their design than the true pyramids. But this had been an extrapolation upon a structure called a mastaba, a kind of a burial chamber where there was a below ground portion and then a rectangular building above ground on top of that. And basically Imhotep first built another square portion onto the top of that and then another onto that, and this was the rough pyramid shape. And presumably architecturally, that concept was built onto. What's fascinating to me, again, is that we see multiple ancient cultures doing similar kind of structures. Point in case, Teotihuacan, just like we were talking about with Dr. Carballo last week.
Wow. I would have went to Brazil, though, man. I mean, I don't know. I can't stop thinking about that. Were they going to fund the whole thing for you? Like, you would have been totally good that way. I don't know.
That's the one thing about TV that is appealing. Again, if you're someone who's passionate, you want to do real research, if a good offer like that does come along, yeah, you want to go do it because they're offering the financial backing you need to carry out that research. So again, it's a double-edged sword. It all has to do with the right deal.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you, man. I'll never get, maybe one day somebody will offer me to go somewhere like that. That would be, but see, the thing, I'm not really prevalent on all these subjects. Like, I'm more of the, and this is something I want to get into here in the last part of the show with you that I meant to get into in the beginning, is the altered states, consciousness exploration of these types of things. I mean, I could definitely talk to somebody on TV about that because I've had those type of experience. But again, I still don't push it as a narrative. I don't think I could sell it as a book or a weekly program or T-shirts or something. I just don't think that that's what we should be doing. Right? Not yet, anyways.
Yeah, maybe there's the sacred side of it. And by the way, I can't stay. I got to go. No, I'm just kidding. You know what? I'm all wound up. So if you want to save some of this conversation for the final hour, I was going to put you on the spot anyways and say, Micah Hanks, I know it's going into the witching hour there for you in the East, but will you stay with us here on Lighting the Void and finish this discussion? And then you would have had to say yes. Right on, right on. Speaking, we'll be right back with Micah Hanks. He's going to stay with us.
This is Elle. I listen to Lighting the Void because it's interactive radio with good content, interesting guests, and a humble host, sharing this journey through the esoteric. Hey, Joe Roop. Thanks for having us along for the ride.
Thank you so much for a delightful evening.
Well, I got a lot of ground to cover.
Hi, this is Aaron Hunter, host of Real Paranormal Activity, the podcast where we tell real paranormal experiences of people from around the world. And we also conduct interviews with authors, investigators, psychics, and mediums. Real people, real stories, real fear. Thursdays at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern on The Fringe FM. See you then.
This is Paranormal News. I'm John Jeter. Rocks from the moon that have been preserved since the Apollo program are out and about to be opened up for the first time. 9 research teams will soon get their hands on the precious evidence. These rocks are from the Apollo 15, 16, and 17 missions. One of the samples is still wrapped in the metal tube that was used to pull it out of the ground. It was collected in 1972 by Apollo 17 astronauts Harrison Schmitt and Gene Cernan. Other bits are as old as 50 years. These samples have been preserved in either helium or in a deep freeze since they were brought back all those decades ago. NASA's acting director of the Planetary Science Division, Lori Glaze, says these samples were deliberately saved so we could take advantage of today's more advanced and sophisticated technology to answer questions we didn't know we needed to ask. Don't forget about the moon bugs, man. Finally, something that would have me running faster than I've ever run in my life. An Argentinian man got a little too familiar with what he describes as a shadowy, giant, man-like creature in a hat that chased him for 10 miles. He became hysterical about his encounter as he showed up to work at a sugar mill. Locals say he had a run-in with a creature known as El Familiar. Legend has it that when the sugarcane industry was on the decline, the government allegedly took a bailout from the devil himself for a price. In return for protecting their groves, he would perform an annual human sacrifice and be dragged to hell by a headless black dog with a chain around his neck. Those lucky enough to survive come out of the fields with their clothes ripped off and bodies scratched. It's said they paid large sums of money to keep this all quiet. Read these stories and more at ParanormalRadio.com. I'm John Jeter, and this is Paranormal News.
Hey, Fringe FM listeners. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or no Wi-Fi available, you can still listen to every minute of The Fringe FM by calling 701-719-3971. No smartphone app or internet needed. Saves your data plan and no extra cost if you have unlimited minutes. Call 701-719-3971. That's 701-719-3971. Listen to The Fringe FM on any phone, anytime, anywhere.
Poor water quality is a major health issue, and it's only getting worse. Municipalities can't keep up, standards have dropped, and pollutants are increasing. Where does it all end? It ends by keeping the pollutants outside of your home with HydroCare's advanced systems available at Wave Home Solutions. No less than the best purification materials and processes have been developed by HydroCare to provide you with healthy, clean water for drinking, cooking, and showering. HydroCare far surpasses the competition in removing chlorine, odors, iron, lead, chemicals, limescale, and much more. Don't settle for less when it comes to your water. We'll take care of the toughest water problems for you, whether it's from a city or well source. Satisfaction guaranteed. For more information, call 888-997-WAVE. That's 888-997-WAVE. Or go to bestwater123.com. That's bestwater123.com.
Wave Home Solutions for a healthy, comfortable home.
You're listening to Lighting the Void Radio.
Follow The Fringe FM on Facebook and Twitter at The Fringe FM. Start your evenings with The Fringe FM long before those other shows get started. Exclusively live on The Fringe FM, hear the Quantum Hologram Matrix with the Reverend John Polk, Tuesdays at 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern. And our newest show, Sci-Spy Radio with Suzanne Ross, Wednesdays at 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern. Then stay up because we're burning the midnight oil well into the morning hour. The truth is out there, and so are we. Lock it in, The Fringe FM.
All right, welcome back to Lighting the Void. We're here with Micah Hanks. We're discussing alien life and altered states as well as archaeology with the one and only Micah Hanks, the host of the Gralien Report, more well-known Gralien Report, also host of Middle Theory, and your new show. Name that one more time for me, Micah.
Sure.
You got-
The Seven Ages Audio Journal is that other program. It comes out twice a month. And then Middle Theory and the Gralien Report, of course, are weekly programs. So I'm producing a lot of podcasts. There's a lot of work, man. You know how it is, though. I mean, you're on 4 nights a week now, and congratulations. And plus, you're doing these
I produce other people's shows too. Yeah.
Yeah, you do that, and you're up all night. Obviously, I know that. I'm still drinking the coffee over here, so. But yeah, it's hard work. That's what I'm saying. And I mean, I admire people like you who, you give us this. Through doing a show as often as you do, you give us this window into your life. And so as the individuation process occurs and the real inner self of Joe Roop unfolds before us, we are all enjoying watching a play of sorts. We're seeing you become who you are, and that's kind of a fascinating thing.
Yeah, I definitely don't approach this show as somebody that's an expert or authority in anything, even though I've had somebody tell me to do that. Well, you got to put on this authority type of image. You can't second guess yourself. You can't do, and I'm like, wait a minute. I'm not going to do, first of all, I'm not going to do anything fake. Fakeness destroys stuff in my soul. It always has. Even in my life when I was working in corporate worlds, and you have to do fakey type things. It destroys me from the inside out. So I'm definitely not going to do it in my creative endeavors. Yeah, absolutely. Every artist hates having to sell their work. They hate that corporate side of things. And that's the problem with corporate anything. I don't know. I mean, you can do it and there's a way to do it and to do it authentically, but that's the whole thing. I think that this whole thing, like, Matt Oakley, who's a longtime contributor to my programs and occasional co-host, he was talking about at this job that he had
they called everybody into the workroom one day and they played this little video. It wasn't an inspirational video. It was supposed to be, I don't know, I guess it was intended to be sort of inspirational, but it was supposed to kind of set the mood for this new program that they were introducing. And they entitled it, this is going to be very Jungian for you, The Hero's Journey.
There you go.
Or maybe more Campbell-esque, Joseph Campbell. And what they were trying to inspire the people in the workplace to do was to find their own inner path to the hero's journey in the workplace.
Oh my gosh. What corporation was this that did this?
I don't know. I mean,
I don't want to get sued. It doesn't matter. I'm sure that I totally believe in that though. Cause when I worked at Verizon and they did all kinds of stuff to try to make sure that, everything they did was centered around the fact that you don't get depressed and lose it. Right. So exactly. How do we keep them happy? How do we keep them motivated? How do we keep them and look, it was a great company. They did a lot of cool stuff, but in the end, it just wears you down.
It's ridiculous. Good morning, slaves. Let's see if we can make you guys artificially happy today.
Right.
Bonus raise. We're going to have to write you up. But you know what? It's okay. Here's some sweet tarts. I mean, it's, oh God, it's ridiculous. But see, that's the whole superficiality that we hate. you know,
for sure.
That's the thing. The thing that kills me, and this is funny, and I sense that you have a question coming up, but I will say this. Years ago, and this is funny, it was on the Above Top Secret forums. There was a guy he wrote this rant about me, and he's like, who is this Micah Hanks guy? This guy just came out of nowhere, just overnight. He's got like 4 podcasts and mystically has this book that, just shows up along with his prepackaged personality. And he's like, this guy is the used car salesman of ufology. And I'm like, whoa. I'm like, well, I'm glad you don't know about the 10 years, that I've spent writing, reading, researching, working, to get away from a corporate BS interpretation of existence so that I could be a free thinker and try and, again, you don't have to agree with what I say, but for God's sake, I'm always going to be honest, and I'm always going to tell you what I think. And I don't do that to make friends. Quite evidently, that's, again, look at the end result here. I get attacked. And it doesn't happen all that often, but the point I'm making is I could tell you everything you want to hear. Is that more real to you than me saying something you disagree with, but telling you honestly how I feel? Who's the real used car salesman? The person who's being honest and telling you and pissing you off, or the guy who's telling you what you want to hear that you agree with, huh?
Yeah, I think we worry too much about offending people. Again, that goes back to always remember that when I start to get worried that I'm going to offend somebody. I remember John Anthony West staring me in the face on Skype going, if you offend them, good. Maybe they need to be offended. Maybe you need to. And
West.
Just good. I hope they get offended. He would say that.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. He was. Yeah. Oh, what you want to do? You want to offend more people. That's your whole point. If you're not offending them, you aren't doing your job. He was great because, again, the thing about John Anthony West was that you had the rare combination of a hyper intellect and then also a guy who just didn't give a damn who he rubbed the wrong way, as long as he was consciously making an effort to be a person who presented the closest approximation of the truth that he found. Now, again, John may not have been right about everything in his interpretations of Egyptology. I mean, as you can tell, I'm very fond of some very traditional archaeological interpretations of ancient Egyptology, by professors of said branch of archaeology. Egyptology, I think, has a whole lot of merit. And I'm not really on board with all the guys who say that, the Egyptologists don't know anything. They're all wrong. Graham Hancock, who I've read plenty of Graham's books, and I absolutely adore his writing style, but I can also disagree with more than half of what he says and still recommend his books and still say I love his writing. But again, the attitude that, all Egyptology is bunk and we're the ones who are really right, I don't know that that's necessarily the truth. However, they absolutely do pick out some things that I think that if the archaeologists at times would be open-minded to, they're capable of anticipating certain trends and changes and making certain observations that perhaps it takes a non-professional to be able to make. Again, it's a cumulative thing where we need what the professionals are able to glean and the science that goes into that, and then that outsider perspective looking back in going, but what about this? And so guys like West, that's what they absolutely were able to lend and what guys like, at times like Hancock still does. Again, I'll tell you this, Graham Hancock often derided. Many people just roll their eyes when his name comes up with archaeology, but then a lot of my friends in Southeastern archaeology actually highly respect his work, even though they don't agree with things that he may have written, 20, 25 years ago. But one of the phrases that often comes up in relation to that, they're like, Micah, you can change your mind. You may have once believed in earth crustal displacement, and all these kinds of things. That doesn't mean that you have to today. And Hancock has time and time again acknowledged things that he got wrong and that he's had to change his mind. And even as recently as with Magicians of the Gods, I was recently picking that book up and actually beginning to read it for the first time. And I'm, not even into a full chapter yet. And I'm going, okay, well, I don't agree with that and his interpretation of this or that. It's obvious that he is a journalist, not an archaeologist. Of course, I've got a background as a writer too, but I'm not the accomplished journalist that Hancock is, but I've studied more probably legitimate archaeology than he has. And so, again, coming at it from the two angles, there are things I respect, and then there are some things I disagree with. But that doesn't mean I have to go start a hate blog, the Hancock hate blog, and just attack him all the time.
Yeah,
again,
and look, even those guys don't agree with each other sometimes. If you take like Randall Carlson and Robert Schoch, they don't agree with certain things. They just don't.
Schoch,
but they don't treat each other like we treat each other in the forums or in the community,
Well, Schoch is, and that's something interesting. So I was hanging with Randall recently. We went down and we went to his house actually last fall, the Seven Ages team and I, and we took him out to dinner. We said, Randall, what's your favorite restaurant? Pick your favorite restaurant. We're going to treat you to dinner and just hang out. And at one point, so there's Jason and James and I sitting there in this restaurant, Ted's, north of Atlanta, and we're having dinner with Randall. And, Randall's got that deep booming voice, the way he talks to people, and, he just commands the conversation. I think it was the most I've ever seen him sit and just listen with the three of us. I mean, he was sitting there, because with Randall, I will note this. A lot of the time when he goes on these radio shows, people take Randall to be a wind him up and let him go kind of guest. Oh, let's get Randall on because he's incredible, and it's going to be like this knowledge dump, but they often don't possess a lot of knowledge about like the Younger Dryas, and the geological processes he's discussing. Well, I've got a team geologist who's currently employed with the Army Corps of Engineers, Jason, of course, who, although an environmental scientist, is very up to speed on archaeology. And then, of course, yours truly, the autodidact, the self-educated amateur and guy who's on a quest to understand all of space and time. And I mean, we're sitting there and Randall, it's funny because I noticed at one point, it's like, wow, this is the quietest I've ever heard Randall Carlson be. So, and I think he really appreciated that with us at dinner. He's like, guys, we should do some trips together. But at one point, and again, Randall, he starts talking and we're all just enjoying hearing him talk too, just sharing knowledge with this guy. I mean, his knowledge is immeasurable. And then the waiter comes over and I realize there's almost nobody else in the restaurant. I'm like, oh God, they're going to kick us out. And the waiter comes over. He says, I apologize, but I was overhearing what you guys were talking about. This is incredibly interesting. And the waiter comes over and he's wanting to talk with us too. And so we ended up staying until I think a little after closing, talking with the wait staff because they wanted to hear what we were all talking about and glean some of Randall's wisdom, and then we go back to his house. Finally, at about 2:30 in the morning, about the same time it is right now, I was so tired because, I mean, again, the knowledge dump. All right, Micah, well, you wanted to know about, and oh my God, every question I had, he's just going down the list. But, but that's the thing about Randall. He's that kind of guy. He's an educator. He wants to share that knowledge. Now,
yeah, well, he's also a seeker too. He's a 33rd degree Freemason as well?
I believe so. Yeah. And one of the things he mentioned, though, coming back to Schoch, you mentioned Robert Schoch. Robert, again, this is what's interesting to me is that although Graham has been criticized over the years, I think through interactions with people like Randall, he has really come to take on an understanding of some aspects of archaeology and geology that many of his peers do not. Randall certainly possesses that knowledge. And now you've got guys like Robert Schoch who are holding out. And once again, this is that process we kind of identified earlier. I respect Robert Schoch a lot. I went to Tulum, Mexico with him, and I've actually spent a lot of time with Robert over the years. Not so much very recently, but there between 2012 and maybe 2015. I mean, I saw him pretty frequently at conferences and things, and we actually traveled a little together. But Robert has been in the camp that whatever happened around 12,800 years ago, the younger Dryas period. He believes this is all related to solar activity.
Yeah, I've got his book on that. I was just fixing to say that.
Right. And see, that's what Randall was saying. He says we were at this conference together. I think it was out in Kentucky last year. And he said we had proposed that there should just be a friendly debate between Graham and Robert, again, longtime colleagues. And Robert, at the end of his talk, explains why he wasn't going to do a debate, and then he didn't show up. And so, again, with all due respect to Robert, I know Robert pretty well, but I was a little surprised that he would just not show up and even be willing to debate and have a discussion about this. Again, these are people who have been on the cusp of trying to argue, often what are counter hypotheses to the mainstream. But now, in certain regards, you might say that it seems Robert's contentions are becoming outmoded, and he now is in that camp where he wants to hold on to his pet theory, whereas the evidence is definitely going in another direction. Now, on the other side of that, when Randall and Graham appeared together on Joe Rogan's podcast and Michael Shermer appears to debate, in that instance, and again, I actually respect Michael Shermer a lot. I'd love to get to know him and talk with him more. He's a very, I think, a very polite skeptic, and again, I'm a skeptic too, but that's why I like the ones who aren't ad hominem all day, every day, 24/7, around the clock, with news at the top of the hour. I mean, he is a very respectful guy and engages in, polite discourse, and he's attempting to be a science educator. But it seemed to me on that episode of Joe's podcast that, Shermer was the guy that brought the knife to the proverbial gunfight. And I was incredibly impressed with how much more about pre-Clovis archaeology Graham Hancock knew and was able to defend those points, whereas Michael Shermer seemed not to have any knowledge of pre-Clovis. And he repeatedly referred to Monte Verde, the site from Chile we mentioned earlier, as Mesa Verde, different site completely. And he said, but he says Mesa Verde is and again, he was using the wrong name. Mesa Verde is an anomaly. Show me the sites between that and Clovis. And I'm thinking, oh my God. I mean, I've been to Meadowcroft Rock Shelter. I've stood in the actual lower Pleistocene terrace that was excavated from the Topper site in Allendale County, South Carolina. I was there last week. Literally, Joe. I was there last week, the team and I.
Now you're just starting to brag.
Yeah, now I am bragging. Yeah, I better stop right there. But the point I'm making is, again, if you're going to go and you're going to debate those, if you're going to debate that side of the thing, you need to be able to have the facts. You need to know the subject. And to his credit, Graham Hancock at times performs better than the skeptics who are arguing for the establishment. So, again, the moral of the story is be careful what ideas you get married to. We can all fall victim to, well, that was my pet theory, and so now I'm just going to defend it until I die. No, be willing to go where the new evidence leads.
I don't know if people have noticed it, though. I've changed my mind on this show about things at least 6 or 7 times.
You got to, and it is okay to change your mind. It is.
Yeah, for sure. But, and here's the thing that this all brings me back to what we kind of started talking about at the beginning of the show, which is something I'm fascinated with. You and I have had this discussion about DMT before. I haven't tried it still to this day. I don't think you have either, right? At least last time we talked, you hadn't.
I'm holding out until you and I can do it together.
Right. There you go. That'll be epic, by the way. But the thing about it is I feel like a lot of this ancient knowledge and the wisdom and Terence McKenna and all this stuff, all of these writings go back to this altered experience. I think about the times that I had an out-of-body experience, Mike, and I think about the way my body felt. And I've had a few surgeries. I don't know. Have you ever had surgery on anything? Have you ever been put to sleep before?
I have. I had, again, a very brief surgery. I think the whole thing went down within a 12-hour period. Stomach pain, went to the hospital, went to the emergency. Yeah. And it was, yep, exactly. And they put me under, and I was out by noon the next morning. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had the same thing happen, right? Well,
there you go.
Okay, so people are talking about the DMT experience almost as if this molecule allows us to pierce through the veil and see through the fishbowl, so to speak, right? Yeah. I don't know about all that, but what I do know is that there's an incredible similarity between that feeling of being put to sleep, and I don't know if you remember what that feels like before your body just goes out, in that vibratory state of sleep paralysis before you have the out-of-body experience, right? So that was just something I was thinking about earlier. I've been there where the body shuts down, and I've had an experience. I don't know if people theorize that DMT is dripping while you have an out-of-body experience. But what I'm getting at is it has to be more than theory at this point. If other people, like technological companies like Microsoft and other people, are experimenting this on their own, like private companies are doing experiments with this to try to see what's on the other side. At this point, I feel like that maybe a lot of these alien encounters are really people's, I hate to say it, out of body or DMT experiences,
Well, this goes back to Dr. Rick Strassman. Do you remember the book he wrote, DMT, The Spirit Molecule?
Yep.
And, I've never spoken to him, but I have corresponded with Dr. Strassman via email. And again, some of that correspondence is related in the book, Magic, Mysticism, and the Molecule. That's exactly why I reached out to him, because I was interested in the idea that such a thing as and I think he referred to it as an endogenous release of DMT within the body, because again, it is established that two things we know: DMT is produced within the body. So wrap your head around that. I mean, the most powerful hallucinogen. Okay, again, it's what schedule would that make it? I mean, it's illegal to be able to own it or sell it in the United States, and yet it's produced in your own body. I mean, that's again, you actually can find DMT in a lot of plants too. But that's the thing, is that there appears to be a peak in DMT levels in the bloodstream at the time of death.
I think it's a Schedule 1 drug or something.
I think so.
Yeah, it's the highest illegal, it's the most controlled, period.
Yeah, I mean, again, so this substance that's produced naturally in your body, and that there are higher concentrations found at the time of death, which some suggest, and again, this is the idea that Strassman had, could there be circumstances, where there is a metabolic control, and that hypothetically someone could learn to control this, that there is an element where DMT can be released into the body, or that a higher level of DMT can be produced at a time, which could produce this so-called endogenous mystical experience. Now, what's really interesting is that in that book, he talked about one of the participants in a DEA-approved study he did, I believe at Arizona State University, if memory serves, back in the 90s. They did this study, and among the participants, some people described, again, situations that were remarkably similar to things like alien abductions. Again, in a controlled laboratory environment where a measured dose of dimethyltryptamine is injected into the body. And again, you put too much and the people don't remember the experience. Too little, they don't have any experience at all. There has to be within a certain threshold for it to be both a experience and one that can be remembered. But he had initially wondered, if, the chemical agent here might not actually be melatonin at first. And then again, what led him to think it was DMT is that there was no data whatsoever that showed that melatonin, even in greater than the typical dosage you would get if you're going to use it as a sleep aid, even if you were to take a much larger dosage, he said that there was no evidence that people actually had waking hallucinogenic experiences. Now, what some people do report is that they have much more vivid dreams under the influence of melatonin. People had said that. But he quickly ruled out melatonin as the chemical agent in these experiences and decided to go on the DMT and see if this might induce these mystical experiences. Now, what's interesting is one of the participants in that study, you'll remember, had been a guy who was a practitioner of meditation of many years. And he had said that he could enter and induce through meditation kaleidoscopic effects, an altered state of consciousness, again, with no kind of exterior or external influence, something induced through a hallucinogen or anything that he took. He said purely through meditation and raising his awareness to a certain state of ecstasy, through meditation alone, he could induce an almost hallucinogenic experience. That man, when administered the same levels of DMT, the same dosage that was administered to other patients who had vivid hallucinatory experiences, in some circumstances reported no hallucinations with the same amount.
Are you talking about Ram Dass? Is that who you're talking about?
I don't know if his name was given in the book, but this is in DMT, The Spirit Molecule. Again, one of the participants, he said that he had no effect from the same measured dose of DMT that other participants had hallucinations under. Now, but he also said that he had actually induced hallucinatory or near hallucinatory mystical states through meditation. So what Strassman, and when I corresponded again, he said, look, this is speculation, but he said we could speculate that a metabolic pathway could be opened through biological processes one may train themselves to be able to do, where DMT could be released into the bloodstream. And it could be that his body already had a sort of, what would you might say? I don't think it was like it would be more like an acclimatization, or, you know, his body had acclimated to that experience more so than it was immune. I don't think it would be immune to it.
Tolerance to it, maybe.
Possibly, again, but this is all speculative. Obviously, even now, decades after that book was written, we still have research that has to be done with this. We still have a lot of questions. Now, I practice meditation. I've never had an out-of-body experience like you describe. I have had sleep paralysis on numerous occasions. But with meditation, I mean, there's some fascinating facets of ourselves that we can learn that don't even involve – it is an altered state of consciousness. I mean, absolutely.
Well, I've never been able to do it through meditation. It's always been – you know, I did the tricks that Robert Monroe talked about and William Buellman, where you're pretty much putting your body to sleep. You do get in sleep paralysis, but you don't panic and you stay awake. So you stay awake and aware as the body falls asleep, as you go into these different waves or these different states, right? And then you can, honestly, I swear, brother, it feels like when I rolled out that first time, it felt like I just peeled out of my body. Now, that could be I just moved into a dream state, and because I was doing this thing, I don't know, but I didn't see any alien beings, so to speak. I did see some weird stuff, though, some shadowy beings and some weird-looking hooded figures, but, yeah, I do. It was so, what I will say, though, is it was so vivid that it did not feel like a dream. I've only had 2 experiences like that, where it felt like right now, as you're looking at your computer screen, that real.
Yeah, that's again, that's an interesting experience in itself, because it gets you thinking, I mean, what is real? I mean, obviously we can identify the waking state, but if you're experiencing something that's more dreamlike that feels as real as the waking state, but you are obviously experiencing unreal things, either overlaid over your reality, or you are in a separate sort of a reality or a state similar to one. You know, that's interesting to me. And that's why, again, I think fundamentally one of the most interesting things to me about this existence is consciousness. I mean, we can't escape the fact that, again, you know, Daniel C. Dennett wrote a brilliant book called Consciousness Explained. And in essence, what he contends is that, well, there are all these very complex neurobiological processes that are kind of running in the background, and that as a result of all these kinds of things, what we perceive as being conscious or aware, it's a process, you know, that results from all these sorts of things. But you liken it to like that little icon on the desktop, right? You can click that icon on the desktop, and the average user experiences that, well, this is a computer and that's how it works. But the programmer knows, well, there's so much more going on, and the code that we had to write to be able to make that little icon appear on that desktop, and everything that's happening behind the scenes when you move your mouse cursor over that and click that, you know, that desktop icon. I mean, that's not really how the computer works. So Dennett's contention is consciousness is the icon. You know, it's the neurobiological processes behind that from which that stems, and hence consciousness is essentially an illusion. And I'm like, I mean, yeah, maybe, but at the end of the day, we could still all agree that we're looking at a computer, and what we call an icon on the desktop is, at least conceptually, what we call that. I mean, we have names for these things for a reason. Nobody disputes that the computer is sitting there on the desktop. You know, it doesn't really seem to matter to most people how it works, but we know that the computer is there, and that, yeah, sure, those processes are happening. That makes that no less a computer. So I would say, at least conceptually, that, yeah, consciousness is a thing, whatever it is that's going on behind the scenes. And as we're understanding those underlying processes, those may help us understand what it means, you know, when these experiences occur. But these are all parts of the experience that make us what we are. We are no less real. Consciousness, to me, is no less a thing, simply because we can break some of those aspects down and explain fundamental strata, you know, layers behind that experience, right? You follow me?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I can't wait till you have one of these experiences, because you're probably going to do 30 or 40 shows on it once it really happens. We only got a few more minutes left here in the home stretch with Micah Hanks. We'll be right back.
is out there.
There's something out here.
And so are we. KTOK Digital Broadcasting, The Fringe FM.
You're listening to Lighting the Void Radio.
Who were the real ancient Egyptians? What is it about ancient Egypt that captivates us all? The critically acclaimed series Magical Egypt is back with all new episodes. Let Chance Gardner and company take you on another adventure through Magical Egypt in the new series Magical Egypt 2. Magical Egypt 2 attempts a forensic reconstruction of the science of the ancients through a study of ancient aesthetics. Also, the best researchers and authors in the field like John Anthony West, Graham Hancock, Laird Scranton, Robert Duval, Lon Duquette, Aaron Sheik, and more join together to explore the topics of the esoteric and the hidden messages of the ancient Egyptians. Just go to magicalegypt.com right now and put in the code word FRINGE and get 10% off any download or order, including the groundbreaking original Magical Egypt series, as well as the new episodes in Magical Egypt 2. Also, check out the great work and the companion series at magicalegypt.com. Click the banner on the Fringe FM or go to magicalegypt.com and use the code word FRINGE and get 10% off your order today while it lasts.
All right, everyone, this is Justin from the UK. Excuse the chitty. If you're into the Fringe and you want to hear the brass tacks, my old china plate, Joe Roop and his guests on Lighting the Void will open your mince pies. You need to shut your north and south and use your 10-speed gears and listen to them bubble. You could hear a Barry Crocker, no Brussels, but he ain't no holy friar. Anyway, you be the Barnaby Rudge and take a butcher's.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Hello, this is Vance Nesbitt. Take the time to expand your mind by listening to Lighting the Void with Joe Roop right here on the Fringe FM.
Follow the Fringe FM on Facebook and Twitter at the Fringe FM. Lighting the Void is proud to announce Mind and Magic's Protection and Defense Course for protection from magical and psychic attacks. This is not a joke. Magic practitioners are on the rise, and with that comes attacks from baneful or black magicians that try to harm or hurt others for their own selfish reasons. If you are not a believer in psychic attacks, then this isn't for you. If you are, and you want the power to defend yourself and your family and home, then I highly suggest you grab Freighter Xavier's Protection and Defense Course. In this course, you will learn how to tell if you are under attack from a natural source or if an individual is attacking you. The 4 forms of curses and attacks. How to remove self-imposed curses. The correct way to cleanse your home from negativity or malevolent entities. How to make your own holy water. What you should always keep near or under your bed. Herbs that banish negativity and promote purity. The most powerful banishing rituals on the planet. And for those that seem to want to harm you the most, how to put your enemies in a hell pit of their own making. You can also learn protection against shadow people and other entities. Or are you just in a bad planetary alignment? Even how to get rid of an enemy using a tic-tac box. It does not matter what your faith or belief is, this will work. Click the banner on the website at lightingthevoid.com or go to lightingthevoid.com/Xavier. Want to know what's on the Fringe FM? Check out our schedule at thefringe.fm.
MicahHanks.com is the website. Our guest tonight is Micah Hanks. You can also go to GralienReport.com. He also does his show on KGRA Radio, a very well-known alternative news and paranormal network. What time does the show come on KGRA again? Does it come on Mondays?
Yep, it's Mondays, 6 to 8 p.m. East Coast time. So that'd be, 3 PT, right?
Yeah, right. And you can get the podcast. I'm getting a lot of messages in chat too talking about, well, Micah sounds like a like an old style radio host with one of those big silver mics. And I was like, yeah, well, I think he's got one of those big silver mics, actually.
I did. Finally died, and now I actually use the good old fashioned Heil PR40, which was the mic favored by the late great Art Bell. Yeah.
Oh, really? That's cool. That is pretty cool. I got another text in, which I think is a compliment for kind of both of us here, that says, let's see, what does it say here? The only podcasts I currently support are owned by Southern gents. If anything, I see more common sense coming from Dixie than anywhere else in the country. Reading has become an underrated ability these days. That's why intelligence levels are dropping through the floorboards. Yeah, so that came in a while ago when we were talking about the community and how we need to wise up on certain things, you know. Yeah,
well, again, those sentiments are much appreciated. Briefly, I'll say this about the Southern phenomena. You know, I mean, I have a friend, and I play music from time to time. I do that a lot less these days than I used to, but again, 5-6 years ago, I was a full-time musician almost, and doing podcasting on the side. Now, every now and then, 4 or 5 times a year, I'll do a music gig, with some of my friends if it pays well, and then I'm doing podcasting, as my full-time thing. So I guess I got to find a new hobby, but that's where the archaeology comes in, right? But the point is this friend and I, we were on our way to a gig. Drew is his name, and he's a remarkable mandolin player. And we were talking about, with all the political correctness and everything that's going on these days. And, I put myself in the egalitarian, politically correct camp where rather than, it being something that is imposed, again, that being the authoritarian political correctness, you must talk this way, and if you don't, you'll be castigated, whatever. I use certain conventions of polite speech, you might say, out of respect for people, because I fundamentally believe in being respectful to others. So that's my egalitarian political correctness. But Drew and I, we were talking about how with the rampant awareness of, the wokeness of especially our youth these days and political correctness, how it's still okay to be, kind of derogatory towards Southerners. Well, you guys are just, I've actually had friends who I think in fairness would recognize my attempts at very least at intelligence, gosh, but they would say things like in a conversation, but you are from the South. And
what the hell does that mean?
Right. And Drew said, do we need to remind them that, again, the people who took us to the moon, the people who've taken us to space, Huntsville, Alabama, and barring the Nazis that we all brought over from the end of the Second World War to put to work down there to help us get our rockets up into space. Again, the South has been an epicenter for a lot of technology and innovation. And so, again, yeah, I get it politically with regard to the history going back, of course, to the Civil War, that people have their issues. But the thing is that, is it really fair to judge people based on what part of the country they come from? Again, I say if we're going to try and see past stereotypes, let's try and see past all stereotypes. And hell yes, I'm proud to be a Southerner who promotes intelligence, reason, equanimity, equality, but also critical mindedness and skepticism when necessary. Let's not be judgmental of people based on such things. I think if we're going to say it for one, class or one idea, let's say it for all. But anyway, that's a little off the point. I just wanted to make that point.
I'm going to be a good point. There was a time when radio wasn't ruled by the folks from the West in California. It was ruled by the South. There was a time when there were lots of big radio hosts from the South. And I'm going to bring that back if it kills me,
Absolutely. Yeah, well, you're doing a good job, in my opinion. I think you do a fantastic job. Yeah.
By that time, I'll probably have moved out to the West, though.
Yeah, I don't know. I may end up out there at some point, but I like it up here in Appalachia. Would you believe, by the way? Okay, so what is it? It's March 22nd. Can't believe where did the whole month of March go? By the way,
I'm glad I'm not glad it's moving fast, but I'm glad the winter's over.
Yeah, well, me too. And we've had spring-like weather. I'll say while we were down there in South Carolina last week, the boys and I. It was definitely springtime down there, but it was getting cold at night. Right now, the current forecast says that it may be snowing outside, or really? I should say above ground. Yeah, since I'm in a bunker below ground, yeah, there is mixed snow and sleet for the next couple of days right here in what would they would normally call, I guess, the sweet sunny South. I guess it's kind of the firm and frosty South. Yeah,
you're
right
kind
now.
of in between, I think, where you're at. You're like on the border of cold and I don't know. Here it gets crazy here too. But I don't know. They say a lot of people blame that on climate. Every year it's like, well, the weather's awful strange this year. It must be the climate change. I'm like, y'all say that every year. You've been saying that since I was a kid. You know? So I don't know about all that.
That's a whole nother conversation we could have, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, for sure. I'm just wondering though, how I know science is more interested in consciousness. I know that there are people doing crazy experiments. But this is something I wanted to talk to you about. I just haven't figured out how to do a show about it yet, is how there are just some crazy science experiments going on. And I've got to get all the proof and stuff that have no oversight, that are completely dangerous in the name of technology. Have you seen that at all in your studies? Like, I'm talking about weapons and human experiments, just stuff that you think, why, how in the hell are they getting away with this stuff?
Yeah, I was, and it may be the fact that here on the East Coast, it's 2:44 a.m. at this point as we're recording this. And there, for a moment, I was trying to understand where you're going. But yeah, you mean the reckless abandon as we are launching ourselves into technological innovations and applications, and we may not foresee what the results may be. Look, there's no better example of this, in my opinion, right now than artificial intelligence. I mean, I think that's going to be the game changer. I think one of the most poignant examples of one of those, oh, wow, what the hell are we about to step in moments was when Elon Musk appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he's sitting there saying, I've been briefing politicians.
The UN, yeah, and they didn't listen.
He talked to Obama about this, and Joe Rogan's like, was he interested? And he said he seemed interested. But, I mean, in large part, you will remember, I mean, and he's a little androidal in his own demeanor, Elon Musk. You can tell he's obviously a brilliant guy, but Joe, after the fact, had mentioned, and I don't listen to all that many podcasts, but during one of the breaks, I will tell you, or I told you during one of the breaks earlier, I do pay attention. I don't listen to every episode. In fact, I may not listen to one, but maybe every 2 or 3 weeks. But when Joe has a certain guest that I'm interested in all, and I will definitely listen to his program. And that's what's fascinating to me about Joe Rogan. Whether it's Alex Jones going crazy for 5 hours, I mean, that to me is a weird sociological experiment. And I find that very interesting for those reasons, not just for what's going on in that room behind that microphone between those guys, but what you see in the media the next day and the way that people, respond to something like that. Same thing with Elon Musk. And after he had Musk on the show, he mentioned that Musk had been real, relaxed and having fun and everything until they got on the microphone. And then all of a sudden, again, it's kind of a funny thing because you being a professional talk radio host, you and I both do this, professional radio podcasting. If you don't spend a lot of time behind the microphone, I've seen that where somebody's like, hey, guys, what's going on? Yeah, okay, cool. 3, 2, 1. Yes,
and then you just go dead. They don't know how to, yeah.
I mean, here's one. I love this too. You have that person who's like, yes, my first experience in this field was very interesting. Where they change everything about how they talk, and oh my God, they turn into Kermit the Frog, and it's like, what in the hell? So Joe had said it's like Elon really clammed up, and so I had to start pouring scotch to try and get this guy to loosen up.
That's what he does to everybody. That's what he does. Everybody will think they want to be the next Rogan. All you got to do is get really famous people on and get them loaded, and you'll be the next Rogan.
Well, here's the other trick I've noticed, because I've done this when I'm interviewing a really intelligent person, a PhD or somebody, but then they aren't used to being on the mic. If you see them starting to clam up, give them a compliment and make a joke. Get them, I'm telling you, within 2 or 3 minutes, you'll get them talking like they forget the microphone's there. But again, there's an art to doing that, and it helps if you can be in the room with that person. It's much harder if you've got them on Skype. And that's why if I'm going to interview somebody, for instance, who I know hasn't had a lot of time on the mic, I prefer a video chat. If it's somebody who I know is just a good guest and everything, we can just do an audio chat. But sometimes it helps to be able to have that visual. I mean, remind somebody that the person on the other side of the microphone from them is a human being, and that, hey guys, look, this isn't like, don't think of it as a show. Think of it as, hell, we're just talking. But that said, so there's Elon sitting there, and there's that moment where he's just like, I talk to everyone, nobody cares. And everybody's just kind of caught up in the mystery of this sort of robotic guy. But I mean, remember what he's saying there. He's trying to warn all of the world leaders about the potential dangers of artificial intelligence. People are like, we know you're smart, but what are we supposed to be hearing here? I forgot the question. question. What time's lunch?
Yeah.
I think that that's part of the problem. I mean, there is the fact that we have our technologists who are kind of careening, toward the edge of the cliff, but they're like, but we really want to see what's down there, so let's get as close as we can. Well, what if you go over? I guess we'll just have to take that chance. And then you got the people who could actually make the decision about, where the car is going. I mean, you got your lawmakers, your politicians, people who could actually play a role in the decision making. They couldn't care less because they don't see this as a realistic problem yet.
I did a series of shows on this, Micah. If anybody, the people that have listened to the show for a long time, when all of this information first started coming out, and I think you covered it too, and it really worried me because I'm like, you guys don't realize this guy's going to the UN and other things. They developed a whole council to go to these people to say, look, you guys are going to make autonomous artificial intelligent weapons. This isn't good. You got people like Elon Musk trying to go against it. And I did show after show about it. I even did, when he went on Rogan, I even finally recorded part of that monologue and played it with a little dramatic feel to it. And I was done because I just felt like it wasn't getting through to people. But it is one of those things that worried me the most. Like in your last show, right? You were talking about space-based weapons. Why, like in 2023, they plan on building some type of particle beam or something. Like, why the hell do they need that? That's not worrying anybody right now. But it is. It should be worrying people why they need that.
One other point in case, by the way, Joe, I write as a freelancer for different sites from time to time, and I actually had one of my editors recently tell me, by the way, Micah, nobody cares about the robotics stuff. And then he gives me a list of subjects maybe that would be better to stick with. These are what our numbers are indicating. We get more hits from it. I'm like, wow, and that's one of the things about being a freelancer. I mean, I've written hundreds of articles over the years and blogs and things for different sites. And of course, for my own site too. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that you face is, I guess if you're writing as a freelancer and you're providing content for people in different areas, I've thought about, doing some sort of an artificial intelligence site of my own. But see, that's the thing is I'll be told by editors, hey, that's just not a subject people are interested in. But when I talked about that on the show last week, I got a tremendous response. Several emails from people commenting specifically about robotics and AI. So I guess it just depends on, what portion of the demographic is listening to your show. Know your audience, but I know my audience, they do seem to be people who share my interest and to an extent that concern for what could be. AI may not be bad. I'm not going to be a doom speaker. I'm not a catastrophist per se, even though I deal with a lot of catastrophic.
It's not the AI that worries me, though, Micah. It's the military's involvement with it that worries me.
That's always a potential concern because, again, that's the whole thing. If there's going to be a technology, who will have it first?
It's going to be
who
the
will
military.
Yeah. And if by virtue of it being the military, what are they going to do? With it, what will the military try to do with AI? Of course, they're going to try and find ways that machine learning can be useful on the battlefield or in other kinds of strategic military operations. So the concern for me is that if indeed, and here's the other thing too, guys, let's just talk about the economics here. The military are the ones who will have the budget too, right? So the problem here is that there is at very least a likelihood that AI will find applications first in military. And if you don't want something that's going to end up like in the Terminator films, what exactly do you want to try and keep AI away from? Those military applications. So that's one of the problems, I think, is by virtue of where the funding mechanisms will be and where you're going to be most likely to find intense efforts to try and innovate these kinds of technologies. I mean, it may not be already written in stone, but there's at very least a likelihood that you're going to see military applications early on. That would be my guess. Right.
And so I'm trying to read between the lines here without being too conspiratorial, but some things are just obvious to me, like that. Another one that I worry about is like you brought up, the space-based weapons, the Space Force trying to own space or whatever. What's the real agenda behind this Space Force thing? Why are we building like beam weapons in space? And has anybody noticed that we've had a little bit more meteorite activity than we usually do? I mean, are they really I think this is something that should be discussed, you know.
I found this crazy PowerPoint yesterday.
The PowerPoint, nice.
I found this crazy PowerPoint online. I did a Google search. I was doing some research with asteroid stuff because there was this new paper, and some colleagues of mine were actually co-authors on this paper that appeared in Scientific Reports, talking about a possible evidence for cometary impact that occurred 12,800 years ago. This evidence has been found on 4 continents, but they've recently found new evidence in South America. And I found this PowerPoint from a NASA talking about strong evidence that a meteor impact is imminent in the 2020s at some point. And I'm looking at this, and I had not seen anything in the news about this. And I'm going, what are they talking about? And on the first page, in very small print at the bottom right-hand corner in red words, it says, something akin to, this is a test only hypothetical scenario. Basically, this power, but it's available. I was able to find it online, and obviously this is a test. Here's a what if scenario. But I was like, I'm waiting for the Daily Mail or one of these tabloids to get a hold of this and go, what?
Yeah, that's hypothetical, but we need a space force and space weapons. Come on, man.
Well, look, again, what killed the dinosaurs? And that's what the Comet Research Group, as they're called, that's their contention, is that around 12,800 years ago, on a much smaller scale, we may have seen a similar thing occur, and we need to be prepared when the next one comes smashing into this wonderful little island mudball home of ours.
It is kind of awesome and extraordinary that we haven't been nailed by one, that Jupiter's protected us from so many hits, isn't it? Like it does feel like, if we really think about it, and it's not something you want, it's kind of like thinking about death. This is not something you want to think about either. But the probability of us getting hit by a huge asteroid as time goes on gets bigger, I think.
Well, you may have seen this piece that was in The Guardian the other day, and I touched on this on the Gralien, in fact, this week, where there was this meteor that it was an airburst, so it broke up over the Bering Sea, but they said it was about 10 times the size of Hiroshima. And, nobody noticed this because it blew up in the air. But again, that would cause widespread destruction if that were over a major population center, or more importantly, if it were an airburst where the space rock is actually destroyed due to friction and pressure as it's entering Earth's atmosphere, if this thing actually smashes into the ground. And again, remember, one of the most widespread events of this kind in the last century was the Tunguska blast of 1908. And that whole experience, that whole event, once again involved an airburst, hence there's no crater. The object presumably never actually struck the ground. There's been some conjecture about that. But again, the majority of the evidence at least points to the object breaking up and exploding, destroying itself while in midair. This thing nonetheless flattened, I think, something in the neighborhood of like 80,000 kilometers of the Siberian tundra. And keep in mind that this object was also smaller than what is easily detectable in terms of dangerous, asteroid threats to Earth today. It was within the range that is significantly smaller than those easily detectable with modern equipment. So, again, the idea that a Tunguska type event could occur today, the truth is, actually, on smaller scales over areas that are less easily noticed. I mean, similar things happen all the time, but when's the next one going to hit that's over a major population area and it's just big enough and the explosion is just significant enough that it actually causes danger? Is that when we're going to start paying attention? Then it could be too late.
Exactly. And look, we got to get out of here, Micah, but I know that for a fact, because I'm paying attention to both chat rooms too, if you guys want more of Micah Hanks, all you got to do is go to gralienreport.com or micahhanks.com. You will not regret it. Trust me on this. You need to become a part of the show. And thank you so much, Micah, for coming back on the program. I really appreciate you spending time with us late night here. It means a lot, brother.
Well, it means a lot to me. And Joe, you are indeed a friend. Always happy to do it. Getting to catch up with you is a pleasure. So let's do it again, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys don't forget that this show is produced by the Fringe FM and cannot be syndicated without written permission. I will also be on the Secret Teachings coming up next. So if you're not absolutely tired of me yet, I'll be on with Ryan Gable coming up. Yeah, music was by Chronox, Kevin MacLeod, Space Station, and Guitar Man was by Bundy. We will see you guys next week. Thanks for hanging out with us. Good night.
views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the Fringe FM, KTLK Digital Broadcasting, its sponsors, affiliates, or staff. Listener discretion is advised.
Don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing. It don't mean a thing, all you gotta do is swing. Makes no difference if it's sweet or hot. Just give that rhythm every little thing you've got. It don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing.